The actions of the story begin one winter morning. It was actively snowing at this time. Getting ready for the upcoming dinner, the girl was preparing food for the guests. A juicy steak was frying on the griddle, which the girl was just about to turn over. Before she could even turn it over, an angry woman burst into the kitchen and hit the skillet. She was perplexed that the food wasn't ready yet. After tasting a piece of meat, she started spitting and saying it was salty. The cook looked at the woman without emotion. She continued to yell, saying that this is something people should definitely not eat, much less on a day like today. The woman started threatening her that she would replace her with a maid. The girl sighed heavily and looked away. Then she turned around and said with a strained smile that unfortunately she couldn't call her family's employees and make them do work that was outside of their duties. The woman frowned very much at this insolence of the girl and did not stop looking at her. At the same time, another member of the family was walking loudly through the house and shouting. A young girl burst into the room and kept shouting. She was asking where the item she had asked their cook to find was. She was a little surprised, but nevertheless told her to wait a while and immediately started wiping her hands. The girl took the package and wanted to present the thing, but the insolent girl only snatched the package. When she opened it, she abruptly became very angry. She could not understand what was inside, for it was not what she had asked for. Once again, without any emotion, the girl who was preparing the food sighed and stared at the ceiling. She justified it by saying that she saw an Instagram post with it a couple days ago and it's kind of popular. Looking at the frustrated and naked girl, she said she just couldn't help but like it. Not seeing any reaction, she decided to take the package back, but the girl clutched it tightly. After a moment, she snatched it back and told her not to dare touch it, for she would keep it. But next time, the girl is obliged to buy her what she asks for. The woman told Sehui to throw that bag away and order some food. The girl leaving the room shouted to her that she doesn't know anything. Let the woman take care of it herself. After all this shouting, the girl went back to cooking and was already humming something to herself in peace. After a moment, the woman came up again and told her to be free for the weekend, because she would be going to the hospital with her. The girl was surprised and asked her mom what was bothering her, and immediately she started yelling at her, asking her why she was pretending or she really didn't understand what was wrong. The girl held her breath at such words. The woman talked about how it had been over a year since she had gotten married and still no children. In her opinion, something is definitely wrong here. And as she decided it was the girl's fault, her mom told her to get a little smart and use it. Then she said that if she couldn't think of it herself, she would help her. The girl still couldn't say a word. After the screaming was over, the girl smiled widely again and said that they had already discussed it with Seo. She wants to go to the hospital with him. Immediately the girl turned her head away, preparing to scream. Her mom only raised her head in bewilderment and stared at her. She began to grind her teeth with all the dislike she could muster. The thoughts of the girl, as well as the girl herself, really annoyed her. Sighing heavily, the woman said so be it. She then changed the subject and began to talk about the principal's vacant seat in the girl's company. The girl smiled and started telling her that she too would like her stepfather to work there, but Seok had already sorted it out. Behind the woman came a man's voice saying that he could try to persuade him to work. Suddenly the woman interrupted him and said that her daughter was acting like a child. In her opinion, if the girl had been as loving as Yura, she would have solved everything herself. The woman thought about it and asked her daughter directly what was good about her at all. At this very moment, knocks on the door came from the hallway, which meant only one thing. The dear guests had already arrived. The woman at their sight immediately changed her behavior and greeted them with a smile on her face. Immediately the guests began to praise the house, saying that it was wonderful. The woman acted friendly to them and joked back, saying they were just lucky. Suddenly one of them asked if the house had gotten more expensive by 200 million won. The woman was surprised and then said that it was not that expensive yet. Then she led them behind her. At that time, the girl served all the guests plates of appetizing dishes. Looking at the girl, they told the woman that her daughter was indeed beautiful beyond words. Iju smiled and greeted all the guests, then thanked them for taking the time to come. After a moment, all the guests started to actively try the food that the girl had prepared. After a while, there were only dirty dishes and empty glasses on the table. While all the guests were laughing and chatting among themselves, Iju decided to go out. Her mom immediately called out to her and asked her to bring more meat for the guests. At this time, the girl was actively going somewhere. The woman asked where she was going to go since all the guests were still here. Iju did not react in any way to the woman's words. She only looked at herself and thought about it. A moment later, the girl was leaving the room. The woman was about to get up and follow Iju, saying that if she wasn't going to serve the guests, then. At that moment, she stopped talking. On the threshold stood a girl who was literally glowing. All the guests who were actively making noise at the same moment also fell silent. Realizing that her daughter did not obey her, the woman tensed up and wanted to raise her voice. Joyful Iju came up to her mother and grabbed her hand. The woman was very surprised at the way her daughter was behaving. The girl with a smile on her face talked about how grateful she was to her mother for always being so nice to her. Iju continued to say with a strained smile and a dose of sarcasm to her mother that she was very lucky to have such a mother. The woman was stunned at such words. Then looking into the woman's eyes, Iju said that Seok called her and asked her to come see him soon. Smiling sweetly once again, the girl made it clear that she already had to run, and so the action moved to an empty parking lot. Only the girl's car was visible on it. Iju was just sitting in the car. On her face was no longer so visible the smile that sparkled at home. She remembered the words of her mom who told her that if today was the day on which Iju was born, it was still the most ordinary day as well. Abruptly hitting the steering wheel, the girl started yelling that this is wrong and it shouldn't be like this. She grabbed her seatbelt and buckled it. But still, she thought about the fact that she had had this situation more than once or twice. Just as suddenly, vibrations came from the back. They were messages that were just coming to Iju's phone. Iju immediately reached for it and saw the messages from her husband, Seok Jeong. He was interested in how the girl's day was going. She unlocked her phone. She had 4 incoming messages and 1 missed call from Seok. Iju went into correspondence with her husband. With the first message, he apologized for not being available earlier. With the second, he said he was still delayed in the meeting. It was only 3 hours later that he was free. Iju immediately had a small smile at finally meeting her lover. Then the girl held her breath and thought about everything that was going on. Once again, she turned her gaze to the phone. 2 hours and 37 minutes. That was how long it had been suffering with her husband's family. She needed to be at the hotel in 30 minutes. Immediately after the girl answered Seok, she put the phone down. Then she got up and started the car, and a moment later she was on her way. The girl immersed herself in memories. It was one of the evenings with her husband. Iju was telling Seok that she couldn't sleep with another person. The guy replied to her that he knows. The girl then turned around and said that maybe in the same room maybe, but definitely not in the same bed. Seok smiled and said that he knows that too. He said that Iju will not have a normal family life with him. He then asked her what she thought a normal and ordinary marriage was. The girl was a little confused by such a question. Immediately the guy smiled even more and told Iju that he didn't care about anything because he had her. From such an answer, the girl's eyes were literally shining, and Iju herself could not pick up the words. Then the girl came back to reality. She stood in the store and looked at the floor. Suddenly, the cashier called out to Iju and asked if she had placed an order in Seok's name. The girl looked up sharply and said that it was correct. A moment later, Iju was already walking down the road and thinking about how fast time flies, and she was also late, so she should hurry up. She was approaching a corner where she could hear people's voices. They were actively discussing something. As she approached the corner, she realized it was Seok, but what was he doing here? Then after him, she saw Yura. Iju abruptly turned away and listened to what they were talking about. Seok was proving to the brunette that she was the only one he loved. He doesn't need her. At those horrifying words, the girl jumped up and literally the whole world started to fall apart. Seok continued to speak. The next words were that he would file for divorce. Once he divorces Iju, then he can with Yura finally. At this point, the girl was no longer listening to what her husband was saying. She did not want to listen to what he was saying, on the whole, nor did she want to see him. After that, the box that the girl was carrying for her husband fell out of her hand. A moment later it fell to the ground and a delicious cake fell out of it. From some noise nearby, Seok and Yura tensed up and immediately turned their heads. Standing in front of them was Iju, who had no face on her. Yura immediately started calling out for her sister. She begged the girl not to jump to conclusions but to listen to her. Iju realized that nothing could be saved. She only smiled disappointedly and turned around. Not listening to these two, the girl began to quickly distance herself from them because she did not want to see them. Hearing the screams of her sister asking her to stop, Iju seemed to only become more aggressive and angry. After a moment, Yura grabbed Iju's arm and finally stopped her. She asked her sister to listen to her for the umpteenth time. Angry, Iju asked what else she needed to hear from their conversation. Straightforwardly, she asked one single question. Did Yura know that her brother-in-law was in love with her? Looking into Iju's eyes, the girl couldn't find the words. It only meant that she knew. Iju then asked her why she kept hanging around Seok in that case. Looking guiltily into her sister's eyes, Yura said that Seok is a good person who knows her. He is kind and understanding. She thought these were fleeting feelings, nothing more. After that, she grabbed Iju's hand and told her that if she talked him well, he would change his mind. The girl started to grind her teeth, realizing that Yura would be selfish right to the end. Seok also decided to get into their conversation, telling his wife that it wasn't what she thought it was. Iju turned her head and looked embitteredly into Seok's eyes. She then whipped out Yura's hand, telling her to let go of it. After that, the girl still went forward since she didn't want to listen to those two. With every second, the girl's pace quickened and it was like she was running. The girl stopped feeling the whole world. She didn't hear or see what was going on around her. In the same way, she didn't see the timer on the crosswalk running out. At that moment, one of the cars in the traffic was speeding ahead at full speed. Finally coming back to reality, the girl saw the car, but it was too late. The headlights of the car in front of her glowed like the eyes of a demon in the middle of a dark forest. The girl looked in horror at what was happening and realized that it was the end. A moment later, the girl's body hung in the air and she flew forward. Iju's heel was left on the ground, from which there was a red trail. Yura saw the whole picture. She was horrified by what she saw. Sayok tried to protect the girl and cover her eyes, but it was too late. With tears in her eyes, Iju, in the last moments of her life, thought of only one thing. Why did she think Sayok could change? As soon as the girl's mind clouded, everything became crystal clear. Unfortunately, the girl realized it late. That's how she died, on the very day she wished she hadn't. The action moves far into the past, to the orphanage. It was snowing heavily that night. The girl could not remember exactly when she was abandoned, but definitely when she was an infant. She lay right in front of the door and cried. In this place she has experienced many adoptions and also many rejections. But suddenly, the crying Iju was taken by the hands. This brightened the consciousness of the girl who was in darkness. That's how she was adopted by the tycoon's family, and things seemed to start getting better. But her adoptive mom, Jumrin, passed away shortly after the girl was adopted. It was a blow to the girl. But what happened next was much worse than that. Her father, who she could rely on, did a very ridiculous thing. He and his half-wife Jeonghai brought home a girl the same age as Iju. This was Yura, who seemed delighted to have a sister. The girl had at one time been actively practicing the piano and playing it in large halls. Iju every worked hard, but all her strength and results could not compare with her sister. Yura easily handled every class and got the best awards. But Iju, looking at all the attention to her sister, always stayed on the sidelines. Even during her school days, her parents always emphasized their attention to Yura, for her academic performance was good. At this time, Iju was looking at the grade sheet with trembling hands. This girl had certainly started to have good luck from the moment she was born. Iju, on the other hand, was only born surrounded by misfortune. She was always on the sidelines, and it was as if everything was stolen from her. Thinking back to the school time, when the girl would calmly walk down the corridor and not touch anyone, she would go to her locker, open it, and a whole pile of books and notebooks would immediately fall from there. They were all ruined. The most offensive thing is that it was done by more than one person. Raising her head, Iju saw only the ridicule of the students around her. It was obvious that someone was spreading rumors about her being adopted, and it was obvious who was doing it. Of course, it was none other than Yura Han. Iju looked at her sister, who was laughing with her along with the others with all the dislike. It was only at home that the girl could be alone. She assured herself that everything would be all right. She would be able to get through this. Suddenly, the girl heard some noise behind the door and was very surprised. Deciding to check who it was, she went out of her room, but there was no one around. She looked at the ground and saw some boxes and a letter underneath her. Inside one of the boxes was a record player. Iju was very surprised at what was happening. In the letter, the guy was saying hello to the girl and saying that he was embarrassed to do that, but he heard Yura talking about Iju liking old things. That's why he decided to record some of his favorite songs that he liked from the old days. Toward the end of his letter, he wished the girl a happy birthday. From what was happening, the girl couldn't find words. She just silently turned on the record player and started listening to the music. After that, tears came from her eyes. It was the first time in her life that such a thing had been done for her. Looking back, Iju still never thought of marrying Sayok. The daughter of the president of WJ Retail married the son of his driver. It really is an unbelievable fairy tale. The girl was still treated as an orphan, even though it was her parents' decision. But Sayok did the funniest thing. She remembered his words when he said that he was happy to be with her, and moreover he would try as long as he had Iju. All those words about him only wanting Iju were tearing the girl's heart. There was no way she could turn back the clock one way or another. Once again, she's back to reality. A car is still coming at her at full speed. In a blink of an eye, she hangs in the air and only her heel remains on the ground. And yet, despite all this, the words of her husband, who swore to Iju's sister that she was the only one he loved, echoed in her head over and over again. He doesn't love Iju. And in fact, it was all very amusing to the girl. Her husband, who once swore his love for her, has fallen in love with Iju's younger sister. As a result, everything was stolen in the girl anyway. Literally everyone she knew deceived her. That's exactly how Iju's hard life ended. But what was that? Some voice was calling to the girl, and it was becoming clearer and clearer each time. Suddenly the girl's eyes opened wide. Her sister was calling her, asking her to wake up. In front of Iju was Yura, who asked how she was feeling. Iju tried to find a single word, for she didn't understand what was happening. Yura in turn continued to interrogate her sister, asking how she was doing. A surprised Iju still stood up. She was puzzled. Wasn't she dead? Yura got up from her sister's bed and said that Iju should wake up because today is the dress fitting. She must look good. In complete terror, Iju asked her sister to leave her room for a while. Yura said she had no problem leaving and went straight to the door. She then turned around and said that she really wanted to go with Iju to pick out her dress and take pictures too, but what a pity. She smiled widely. After saying that, the girl finally left the room and slammed the door behind her. Now this was the point where Iju was still trying to figure out what was going on now, for everything was very strange. She immediately looked in the mirror, thinking that this was some kind of scary dream. After that, she noticed the phone on the nightstand and decided she had to get it. She grabbed it and immediately began to study the information. From this she arrived in shock, for the date was July 19th. There was no way that could be. Iju understood that it should be November 20th, 2001, but what happened? Taking in her face, she realized that this pain couldn't be fake. And she noticed something strange on her wrist and looked at it. It had a strange marking on it. Iju was horrified at what she was seeing. The girl tried to erase the strange marking, but there was no way she could do it. Then she suddenly jumped up and wondered, had she really gone back in time? Today was the day of the wedding dress fitting, wasn't it? If she really went back in time and all those memories are real, then everything she lost should be returned. The action shifts to a sunny city. Iju has just arrived for the dresses. A girl was tightening one of the wedding dresses Iju had decided to try on. Suddenly, she sobbed. The sales clerk was frightened and immediately started asking if everything was all right. Iju sighed and said that everything was fine. Then she asked if she was finished. The girl said that she was done, so now we need to look in the mirror. Iju stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself. Suddenly she asked the salesgirl how many people who tried on dresses here ended up getting engaged. The girl was surprised and said that most likely they could not be counted, because the store in Korea is large. The girl glanced down glumly and asked what about an annulment. The salesgirl, in even greater horror, began to say that as far as she knew, no one had ever returned it. She asked what had happened. Iju sighed and said that everything was fine. Whereupon she asked for the curtain to be opened. In a moment, the girl was showing off in front of the vendors and her future husband. She asked Seok how he liked the dress. An enchanted Seok immediately said that Iju is very beautiful, and this dress suits her. Still, remembering the future, the girl got very tense and swallowed hard. Then she put on a smile and asked if he really thought so. After that, Iju started to move straight towards Seok and looked into his eyes. As she came a little closer, she clutched her hand tightly with the bouquet and swung it towards Seok. The girl hit her future husband right on the head with the bouquet. The boy was puzzled. He immediately started asking Iju what happened. The girl silently took a pen out of the guy's pocket. Iju swung the pen and tore her dress with it. The salesgirls, just like Seok, were completely horrified and bewildered. Seok asked the girl what she was doing, but she just silently kept smiling and looking at the guy. After that, she said that it was a marriage dissolution gift. From such words, the guy could no longer pick up words. Iju then leaned over Seok and said that this image suits him very well. After that, the girl took out her card and with a smile on her face, asked the sales clerk to calculate the bill. Still not recovered from what Iju had done to her dress, the girl took the card with her mouth open. The saleswoman shifted her gaze to the cut of her dress and sighed heavily. Counting, Iju asked not to misunderstand her. The dress really is gorgeous, but it had to be done that way. She hesitated and then with a smile on her face asked if she could wear it. The sales clerk, a little embarrassed, immediately said she could do it. As she left the store, Iju realized that she was starting a new life from now on. She is going to get back everything she has long dreamed of, and she has decided this for herself. The action shifts to a small but cozy coffee shop. In it, the girl asked the interlocutor if she really wanted to meet Dong Seo, and moreover, she wanted to know why her friend called her now. Iju said that it was true, she was going to meet Dong Seo. In between, she also said that she broke up. The girl was horrified by this news. Nevertheless, she thought it was cool. Iju said that she wanted to arrange a blind date, but her cousin wouldn't let her do it. The interviewer was very surprised and asked why she was asking for help with that. She then decided to ask why Dong Seo was suddenly attracted to her. Iju interrupted her friend and said that Seok liked Yura. Iju's every sentence shocked the girl. Is this some kind of passion war? After that, the girl shook her head and said that the Dong Seo option is bad anyway, because that guy is crazy. In her opinion, he can't be the heir simply because he plays games and starts his own game company. The friend asked Iju not to do that, of course only if she didn't ask her friend on her lap. Iju laughed off the fact that the girlfriend doesn't want to help her but wants Iju to beg her. Leaning back, she asked her friend if she knew she was stupid. After that, the girl asked Iju what she would get in return for helping her. Iju said that in return for her help, her friend would know the time when the girl would have to break up. The girl asked back in bewilderment. Iju began to explain to her. Her friend's boyfriend, Pyonghwa-sun, was having an affair with actress Soyeon Shin. The girl cried out in horror and asked what kind of joke this was. Iju said that she thought about her friend knowing about it. After that, she told her that although she seems silly, she doesn't talk nonsense. The action has moved forward 2 days. There were people walking around in the main hall of some establishment, and there was that important man. This man was the most likely candidate to marry Yura. In one of the armchairs sat a serious-looking fellow. He had a businesslike and smooth suit, neat hair, and a confident look. Iju looked at him from the side and scanned him. Self-confident and self-centered, but a complete zero in the financial world. This is Doguk Seo, the second son of Soging Group, which is ranked 3rd in the business world. Finally, Iju sat in front of this guy who was in her sister's interest. After a little conversation, Doguk tapped the table with a card, luring the girl's gaze to his hand. The guy told her they would meet at the hotel a little later. Iju was very surprised at the guy's insolence and laughed to herself. Although she had heard that Doguk was a jerk, she didn't think he would be worse than those rumors. The guy kept up with the girl and said that he had heard some rumors about her too, and he understands that she is not one of the easy ones. Doguk then raised his head and said that if you think about it that way, Iju is a very entertaining conversationalist. Immediately afterward, Iju asked if this was going to be some kind of trial, to which the guy answered her by saying that it was only a meeting. She asked him in surprise if he had to be so direct. Doguk said it's not that bad after all. The girl stared at him and said that she had identified this test from the beginning of the meeting. She doesn't like guys who shine the room key first thing. The guy smiled evasively and said that he didn't think it was a bad idea to entrust his future to the woman who would make him use that key the first time he met her. He stared at the face of the girl, who was looking judgmentally at the guy, and said that he could see through people just fine. The girl got up from the table and said she was sorry, but she probably wouldn't fit into the future Doguk wanted to build. The guy had nothing to lose overall, so he only wished Iju good luck. The girl sighed heavily and decided it was time to go home. Suddenly, she heard a familiar voice behind her. She turned around and saw Yura in front of her, who was just with Seok. She was disgusted to see that picture because it only meant that those memories were true. Iju froze. She realized that she had to do something about it and show her sister greatness. After that, she turned to Doguk and stared at him. Do they only need 1 round for the test? At this very moment, Yura was just distracted and looked around the cafe as she suddenly saw some people she knew in it. The first thing she saw was her sister and then Doguk Seo. What were they doing here? The guy asked Iju in surprise what the first round meant. What is she talking about? Yura, putting aside her thoughts, decided to say hello to her sister and started calling out to her. Iju at this time shouted and said Doguk heard correctly. They only have 1 round. At this very moment, the girl pulled herself to the guy and kissed him. Doguk's eyes widened even more. From this situation, Yura fell into a stupor, just like Seok, who was standing next to her. They silently continued to watch Iju kissing Doguk and could not believe what was happening. Yura's face immediately changed dramatically from friendly and joyful to disappointed and frowning. Iju and Doguk's lips gently intertwined and touched each other. Doguk's eyes still had no way of returning to normal. He himself did not realize what was happening. Nevertheless, he liked the fact that a girl like Iju had made the first move. At that moment, his face changed. Suddenly, the guy's hand touched the girl's face and began to hold her. Iju opened her eyes and was a little surprised. The guy pressed even harder against the girl, both with his lips and hands. Their kiss became even longer and more passionate. This time Iju was already shocked and her eyes opened even more than Doguk's. She clutched her trembling hand tightly. This was the first time in her life that the girl had gone for this. Iju tried to figure out what the hell was going on here. Had she done the right thing? However, she realized that the kiss was already too long. It was because of this that she decided to stop Doguk and pulled away from him. After that, the girl wiped her lips a little embarrassed and looked away. Doguk looked at her in bewilderment. What had happened? He didn't understand why the girl pulled away by herself. Literally immediately, Yura came to their table and asked what Mr. Doguk Seo was doing here. Seok in turn said hello to the principal, and the girl said it was a great coincidence to meet Iju and Doguk at the cafe. Yura then turned her head and stared intently at her sister. Iju decided to be the first to ask Yura what she was doing here with Seok. But at that moment the girl turned her head and suggested that Doguk have dinner together tonight. The girl laughed to herself, for she didn't expect anything else from her sister. It would still be a bit problematic. Iju smiled and held out the room card with the words that it was time to use it. She then looked at Doguk carefully and asked for his opinion. Doguk smiled and said that he agreed with Iju's suggestion. At this moment, Iju held out the card to Doguk, and Yura along with Seok watched in bewilderment. Doguk took the card and they exchanged smiles with the girl while the two of them kept looking at them. And so, the action moved to the room. Doguk explained that it was not a suite, but a business room. He sighed and said that no woman had ever made it all the way here, unlike Iju. The girl interrupted him and apologized for the kiss that was between them. She also added that he could report everything to Yura if he wanted. The guy wiped his lips, then smiled achidically and asked what Iju was talking about. He looked into her perplexed eyes and said that things wouldn't be so interesting if they followed some law all the time. Putting all thoughts aside, Doguk asked if he could find out the real reason why the girl wanted to meet him. The girl said only that it was because of the wedding. Doguk then asked if there was any other reason for a blind date. He then told Iju information that she probably did not know. Yura was also on a blind date with him, so why did Iju choose him anyway? The girl turned away from him and said that Yura probably likes him. Doguk asked in surprise if that was the reason why Iju wanted to marry him. Looking at her reflection, the girl said that she originally thought it was all because of him, but now she is thinking about starting a company. Iju then turned around and told Doguk that she knows about his grandfather's condition for investment. The condition itself is marriage. It is after that he will be able to set up a venture in the company. Doguk looked at the girl in bewilderment and only listened to her in silence. Iju, realizing that the guy was thinking a little, decided to call him and asked him what he thought about it. Then he did begin to speak, and he was surprised at the fact that all this the girl wanted for one kiss. Doguk looked at Iju's disgruntled face and said that it was actually interesting. Everything sounds like she knows the future. The girl of the moment tensed up a bit. At the same moment, Iju's phone vibrated and the guys shifted their gaze to it. The girl immediately started walking towards it to check who was calling her at this hour. Upon seeing the number, Iju immediately pressed the reject call button. There was a notification on the screen from the caller Yurahan. Iju didn't want to talk to her now. Doguk turned his head and asked the girl why she wasn't picking up the phone. Right after that, the girl's phone received the next call. It was Sayok. The girl silently rejected the call and then told Doguk that it didn't matter. Iju put her phone down and asked the guy what his plans were for today. She then raised her head and said that if he didn't have any plans for tonight, they could spend it together. At such words, Doguk's eyes opened wide. He could not believe what the girl had said. Iju asked him in surprise if they could sleep together tonight. Immediately, the guy started laughing loudly and non-stop. The girl stood puzzled and didn't understand what happened. Then he raised his head, smiled evilly, and said that was already a very good price. He has no plans, but on the whole Iju may not hope for a good night's sleep. Such stupid words made the girl cover her face with her hand. She had forgotten that sleeping together has two meanings. The girl took the chair and talked in parallel about how it was not something she was interested in. She then sat in the chair and said that Doguk could try to seduce her. Who knows, maybe that way she could fall in love with him. There was silence between them. Doguk looked at this mysterious girl carefully. Then he smiled and said that he understood everything. Iju probably wants a fake marriage. Doguk leaned toward her and asked her what he would get in return in that case. The girl didn't know what to answer and he kept asking her, what if he chooses Yura over Iju? What is the difference? The guy asked her to prove something that she is worth it, or Iju can try to charm him and maybe then he will fall in love with her. Iju silently looked into Doguk Seo's eyes and tried to think of something to say. However, she was amused by the fact that Doguk is just like her. It was quite amusing. After that, the girl still also got up silently and went to the closet. As she approached the wine cabinet, she decided that it should help them decide. She opened the bottle, then took a glass and started pouring the wine. She then held out the glass and told Doguk that if she were him, she would have bought Innova Games instead of keys. The guy was a little surprised at the girl's words. He hadn't thought about her being interested in his company. Doguk asked Iju if she heard it from his manager. The girl took a sip of wine and asked if Doguk was one of those people who immediately ran to the supervisor when special issues came up. The guy smiled in response to the girl. He liked the girl's thoughts and found them quite interesting. Iju raised her glass and said that she is also curious about their future. After a while, there were already empty glasses and a bottle on the table. Tired Iju, at this moment, was in bed and sleeping sweetly. Suddenly the girl woke up and decided to turn over to the other side. Then she opened her eyes and there was no limit to her surprise. Right in front of her lay a sleeping Doguk. Even asleep he was beautiful. So wait a minute, what's that on his neck? Iju stared at the guy's neck. She was shocked. Is that really her lipstick? How could that happen? Nevertheless, she decided to get out of bed. Iju's head was splitting. Suddenly it was as if she remembered everything, and her eyes opened wide. Horror and bewilderment could be seen in them. Iju remembered the moment they had been drinking wine together. Then she took off her coat, and after that she threw herself at Doguk, saying that she wanted to sleep. Remembering everything, the girl blushed very hard. Definitely last night had been too much. She decided that she had to escape from this room before Doguk woke up. Suddenly a guy behind her started sniffling and she jumped up, because she thought he was awake. When she turned around, she only saw the same sleeping and handsome guy with a lipstick mark on his neck. Looking at him, the girl smiled, and she recognized the fact that even asleep Doguk was very handsome. After that, Iju turned around and walked towards the exit where she was originally going. She then put the money on the table. It was for Doguk to pay for the laundry. After a while, the girl was already driving down the road in her car. You couldn't tell from her facial expression that she was in a good mood. After some more time, Iju reached where she needed to go. She was standing in front of Onyihan's room. Upon entering the room, the girl saw a man in front of her with an IV hooked up to him. He turned around and was surprised that Iju had finally come to see him. She lowered her gaze and sighed heavily. The girl felt some kind of guilt in front of her grandfather. Iju came and sat down beside him, and he immediately took her hand. While holding her hand, he said something to the effect that Iju was his only granddaughter. He apologized to her, saying that it was all his fault. All this he repeated to the girl for 3 months. With tears in his eyes, the man continued to apologize to Iju. 3 months after that day, Onyi's entire inheritance passed to Yura. Iju knew it was her duty to verify her grandfather's words. She turned her head and saw her grandfather's toothbrush. She decided that she should take it with her. Just as Iju started reaching for it, the ward door opened and someone came inside. On the threshold stood a woman who introduced herself as Yura and called out for Grandpa. Once again she smiled and asked if he remembered his granddaughter Yurahan. After that, the woman began to groom Grandpa and wiped his face. Suddenly she turned to Iju. The woman said that Iju had no respect for her elders. Had she not been taught manners? Without further ado, the girl decided that the best solution was to leave. That's why she turned around and walked towards the door. As suddenly her mom called out to her. The girl immediately turned her head. The woman started scolding her, asking her where she was yesterday and why she didn't answer the phone. The girl sighed heavily, but then she did pull herself together and smiled confidently. She turned to her mother and told her that she was on a date. The woman's eyes, just like her mouth, opened wide. Puzzled, she asked if Iju was on a date with Doguxio from Sagang Group. The girl laughed and said that she thought right, but how did she know that? From Yura. At this moment, the girl was holding her grandfather's toothbrush while the woman looked at her daughter in bewilderment. Iju, looking at her mother's face, continued to smile. Afterward, she said that there would soon be good news for her. The action moves to an office where there was a meeting on an important topic. The guy was talking about the sales of the new game GoldenEye, which had increased by 22% in the first quarter. Doguk sat and listened to the presentation, but still his head was not full of sales. He was interested in that girl, Iju-han. He didn't understand what she was doing or what her intentions were, but the letter the girl had left said that she had left money for cleaning the room and if possible for breakfast. He leaned back in his chair and began to ponder what all this meant on her part. He then began to think back to the previous evening. In her already not very sober state, Iju was telling him something, but every time the guy turned away she would yell at him, asking if he was listening to her. Doguk's behavior made the girl laugh rather than causing him to change his behavior. The girl, after her monologue, summed it up by saying that this is the way she had to live her life. Quite funny it was in her opinion. Suddenly she stared at Doguk and asked if he could see memories. The guy, looking at the floor, said he could. Once again Iju averted her gaze and said that there was not a single moment that could hook her. She asked the guy how such a thing could be, but he didn't know what to tell her. Receiving no answer, she sighed and continued talking. Iju decided that this time it would be different. Although no, it should be different. Again the girl is heavy and asked who she is even talking to now. Iju suddenly got up and shouted that she was going to bed. Doguk was very surprised at the speed of the change of topics. At the moment the girl started to undress and the guy got very tense. He immediately asked what she was doing. Doguk was a little embarrassed, for it was not in this environment that he wanted to do this. The guy immediately started trying to dress her. The girl was even more horrified by this and started screaming and telling him not to touch her. The guy took the angry Iju by the shoulder and said that all he needed was for the girl to calm down. Though he suddenly stopped and thought about it. The girl had a dress under her coat after all, so it was okay. At that moment, the girl tried to go somewhere, but tripped over a chair. Iju started flying towards the bewildered Doguk, who finally stopped believing in what was happening now. The guy, due to the surprise, couldn't hold her, and in a moment they were both lying on the bed. The girl at that time was already asleep. It was as if she had fallen asleep as she flew towards Doguk. The boy at this time lay bewildered. He blushed and realized that his heart was beating very fast. He tried to bring himself to his senses by saying that it was only an accident. Suddenly the girl started moving and making sounds. The boy was a little frightened. Also suddenly, Iju grabbed Doguk and pressed herself harder against him. The poor guy even sobbed at this. It was very unexpected. In the end he had to lie in this position to avoid waking the girl, because he really liked it. But still he was embarrassed by this incident. After a while Iju rolled over to the other side. Doguk was finally able to stand up and breathe out a sigh of relief. He then turned around and looked at the sleeping girl and decided he couldn't leave her like that. The guy took a blanket and covered her up, thinking about how this really is a girl with no brakes. Suddenly Doguk noticed something strange. The license plate on the girl's hands caught his eye. Suddenly, he was at a loss for words. He definitely knew this inscription. The guy completely covered the girl and said that he didn't want to remember some moments from his life either. He promised her and himself that this time would be different. Thanks to Iju, Doguk stroked the sleeping girl's head. Once again, the action moved forward some time. Once again the offices. Doguk looked at the time. It was already 10 o'clock in the morning, but no notification. It was strange for him, because yesterday Iju had talked about the wedding and today there was not a single call from her. As suddenly he was interrupted by one of the employees of the company. He asked the director what he was thinking about the relationship or about the meeting. Doguk slightly misunderstood the question and asked what the question was about. The guy smiled and said that it was the first time he had seen Doguk Seo thinking so passionately about something other than work. Holding out the tablet, he said congratulations to the director. Doguk looked at the screen in bewilderment. It was a news story whose headline read "Alone Tycoon, so good." And the picture was of Doguk and Iju. Immediately he started scanning the article, asking if this was the second son of Sogang Group. The guy said that's not the most important thing from the news right now. He told the director that because of the criticism and scandal, the company might suffer losses. Suddenly Doguk saw the author of the article. It was his favorite cousin, Sujin An. Turning off the tablet and holding it back out, the guy asked if Doguk's assistant had contacted the girl. The guy said that of course he had contacted. Then he leaned over and said he was able to find out even something more interesting. He had heard that the two went to the same elementary school. Doguk asked if that could mean that they were in a close relationship. The guy said that it doesn't. They are not that close, because at that time they didn't really get along with each other. Kai exhaled and realized that this was just in Sujin's spirit. He immediately asked the assistant to bring the reporter on Sujin to him. The guy tensed up a bit and said that he could have brought the girl here, but Doguk asked in bewilderment what was wrong. Suddenly his assistant asked if the director wanted to sleep with another girl. These words really amused the guy, and at that moment a smile appeared on his serious and surprised face. In a moment Doguk was laughing and couldn't stop. The assistant stood in utter bewilderment. Then the guy stood up, grabbed his jacket and started walking somewhere. The secretary asked where he was going. Doguk turned his head and smilingly said he was running away. At that moment the door began to open. Suddenly the assistant's eyes opened and he called out to the principal with a little terror. From the looks of it, it was already too late to go anywhere. At that moment a woman stood behind Doguk and asked the guy where he was going. He turned his head in horror and sweetly asked if she had already arrived. The bewildered woman asked if Doguk was going to get married. The boy turned his head away and said uncertainly that he was going to. The woman was already angry, for every time she asked him that, he would not look her in the eye. She kept yelling and asking him why she doesn't know what Sujin knows. Doguk then exhaled and said that the father doesn't know either. In that case, the woman asked to be told. Such a topic gave a woman a headache for days. And why only Doguk decided to get married? The guy turned to the secretary and asked her to explain his nickname he was using. He was a little surprised and asked if it was really necessary to talk about it here. Doguk nodded confidently. The secretary lowered his head and quietly whispered that Doguk is asexual. That is, no sex drive and impotent. At such terrible words the woman was very surprised and only opened her mouth. She did not believe in the words about impotence, and in general everything she heard sounded like complete nonsense. The guy smiled and said that he had been living with it all his life, so he had to prove it to people. The woman suddenly screamed, "Is this really the reason Doguk wants to get married?" The boy wondered why the woman was acting like a child. He told her he just can't live without the girl he found. She kept telling him that his ideas were bullshit. "You don't have to say that." Suddenly Doguk asked why then Ms. Cha chose her father and married him, even though he had a first wife. The woman at this moment could not hold her emotions and hit Doguk in the face. She told him that he was a common rude child. Doguk in turn looked at the woman in bewilderment. The woman then walked quickly to the elevator and began clicking nervously on the call button. Suddenly Doguk approached her and grabbed her arm. After he turned her around, he said that he would return his father's company. The woman looked at him and could not determine whether it was true or not. She asked him what he was talking about. The guy smiled sweetly at her and told her that he would try to get it all back. Doguk will get his father's love and of course his grandfather's legacy. The guy's voice was confident. The action moves to a beautiful beach. At this time, someone called Iju. She asked where the girl had disappeared, to which Iju told her that she was at the beach. The girl was terrified. Was she really at the beach? She told Iju that the girl was crazy. Then she decided to ask if she was really going to marry Doguk Seo. In a calm voice, the girl confirmed these words and said that she would marry him. That's why Iju wanted her friend to do a favor for her. The girl laughed and asked why she should help her. Iju sighed and asked if her friend thought she would help her for free. Immediately the girl asked what she meant. She suddenly said that she knew about her seeing him. This made the girl spit out her coffee. The girl in horror started asking how she knows all this. Is Iju really following her? Iju said she wasn't, but added that that guy had a kid. The friend was horrified and asked what she was talking about. and Iju said that his current girlfriend was pregnant. Anyway, Iju started assuring the friend that it wasn't as scary and bad as it sounded. The girl on the other end of the connection laughed and agreed with her and then asked if Iju wanted to know what really weird thing happened the other day. At this point, the girl saw something in front of her and told her friend she would call her back. Her friend was saying something, but Iju was no longer focused on the conversation. The girl started asking why Iju was leaving. What was wrong? Iju didn't listen to her anymore and just put her phone down. The same guy was standing in front of the girl. Donguk approached her. The guy took off his glasses and said that he had been looking for her for a long time. Finally, he found the girl who had not left his mind. Donguk asked Iju why she decided to stay by the sea. Actually, he just hates it. The girl skipped this question and only asked him why he was looking for her. The guy explained it by the fact that she didn't answer the phone after that very day, although he wanted to talk to her and return the money. The girl looked at him in bewilderment and asked him what kind of money he was talking about. Anyway, she said that there was no need to return anything, because there was no reason to do so. Donguk sighed heavily and said that he had never seen a girl run away and leave a note. He asked if she wanted to impress him. Iju tensed up at the guy's confidence and said that he had come all the way to see her for nothing. Suddenly, the girl asked if Donguk had run out of money by any chance. At that very moment, the girl in her head was saying that she was crazy because such a thing could not be said. The guy smiled and said that he really had a loss, even a very big one. Iju was a little confused and asked again. Donguk told her that she was the first to ask about the wedding and he should take full responsibility for it. But that very night, someone got very drunk and the guy couldn't finish the dialogue. Iju couldn't find the words. Nevertheless, the guy smiled and said that there would be a wedding. He wanted to thank the girl for the incident that happened, and that's why he came here to say all this. Donguk turned around and told the girl that she had no time to be idle. If she doesn't use her time properly, her sister will be standing next to him. Iju became very tense. Of course, she didn't want that fate, so she told the guy that she understood him. He turned his head and looked into the girl's eyes without any emotion. After that, he smiled and said it was about time to go out to eat, so he called Iju with him. The girl asked him again, to which the guy repeated his words once more. He told her that they should eat together. To herself, the girl only thought about the fact that she thought it was going to be much easier. She decided to refuse, saying she didn't eat with anyone and had her own reasons. Donguk asked her why this was so, and the girl said that she was very squeamish in this respect. The guy laughed and told her not to take it into her head. In that case, he would be first. Suddenly, he remembered something and reached into his pocket. Donguk asked Iju to apologize properly. He held out 2 bills and said that the price for kissing without consent, the price for leaking the photos, again without consent, and the price of that stupid note was to apologize properly. At that moment, the guy tore up the bills Iju was giving him. The guy let go of the notes and repeated that he wanted to eat with her. Then he held out his hand and said that this was the first condition of their wedding. Iju looked at him in bewilderment. And so the action does move to the cafe. As expected, the girl quickly assesses the whole situation. Nevertheless, she was not satisfied and asked Donguk who makes food the first condition for the wedding. The guy said he had no other choice. If he hadn't told her, they wouldn't soon be able to sit together like this. The annoyed girl looked into Donguk's eyes and couldn't find the words to tell him. The boy asked if the convenience store was suitable for people who don't eat with others because of squeamishness. The girl looked frustratedly at the table and said that at least they didn't have to check the food process from the convenience store. Donguk still noticed that Iju was upset about something. He asked her what was wrong. She said she would be downcast rather when rumors spread that the tycoon's son was now with an adopted girl. The boy tilted his head and said that it was quite interesting. The girl looked at him questioningly. Donguk asked if he really looked like the biggest villain in the tycoon's family. Most likely the girl is just crazy. Changing the topic, Iju asked if she had done something unnecessary that day. The guy looked at her and was a little unsure of what she was talking about. The girl suddenly shouted, saying that she was about that very day in the hotel when they were having drinks together. The guy laughed and marveled that Iju probably didn't remember anything at all about that day. He asked if she really cared. Anyway, he laughed and said that they were pretty close that day. Well, for example, Iju hugged him. She left a kiss mark, and in general they slept together. The girl was shocked by all these words. She suddenly hit the table and asked Donguk to stop. The guy also changed the subject and asked why she was eating so little. Had she already eaten today? Annoyed, Iju asked him not to change the subject. And what's more, it's her food, so she should know better. The guy took note of this and then for curiosity's sake asked what kind of guys she liked. She looked at Donguk in slight incomprehension and said she had no preference. The girl asked why all of a sudden he started asking such questions. The guy asked Iju how he was to her in terms of a boyfriend. Her eyes immediately opened wide and she asked again. Donguk said that he was starting to like her a little bit and that's why he was interested in her thoughts too. Receiving no answer, he asked Iju, doesn't she have a single thought about him? Iju looked at him with her eyes wide open. Doguk asked why she was so surprised since they were going to get married. People only marry people they like. The guy looked at her and asked, "Isn't that right?" The girl replied that it was a waste of time and would be bad for business. He smiled and said sarcastically that it was a pity. Now he was even a little nervous. The guy tapped the table nervously. Doguk started saying that night, Iju couldn't take it anymore. She interrupted him sharply and told him not to talk nonsense. The guy smiled and said he hadn't even said anything yet. The girl noticed that her future husband was only looking in one place. On her hands, she looked down. What caught her eye was that strange inscription that appeared after death. Iju quickly hid it with the sleeve of her sweater. She didn't want him to see it. The girl asked if he happened to notice anything on her wrist. The guy asked again, "Is she hiding something there?" After that question, she thought it was more likely that he hadn't seen anything. Iju averted her gaze and said it was nothing like that. Doguk looked at her questioningly, deciding to change the subject. She smiled and suggested they talk about what they really cared about. The guy looked at her and asked if they were finally going to start. Iju said seriously that WJ Retail was about to fail financially. That was why Doguk needed a marriage with Yura. The boy replied that he himself insisted on it. He is going to get more investors, so the girl needs his help. Iju heard that marriage is one of the conditions under which his grandfather will invest in JC Soft. If everything goes right, he will be able to manage the shares of the company in the future. The guy smiled and asked if she would buy shares in the company even if they are not listed now. The girl also smiled and said that she had already bought them. Already tomorrow she will have 5% of the shares. The guy's eyes lit up. He praised and said it was a great start and asked what would happen next. Iju replied that with this start, all the shares will be sold out as soon as WJ Retail's stock drops. Doguk thought that he would crush all of them like ants and take over this company. To her, he replied that it would take about 30 years. She smiled and said that's why she needed him. She wants him to invest in her company. The guy thought about it for a moment. He wondered if WJ Retail was worth it all. Iju promised that she would make sure he would not regret it. Doguk asked how she got all this information in the first place. He would like to employ her in his company. The girl replied that she was not interested in their games. Doguk said that what they do with her is no different from playing games. Iju angrily looked nowhere. The guy added that it's a game with a 50/50 chance of being caught or not, and it won't be as easy as it looks. Iju thought about it, and immediately replied that even if it is, they will still succeed. She abruptly got up from the table and the guy asked why she was so sure about it. The girl replied that she relied on his investment and her assumptions. Iju's phone vibrated and she looked at the message that came to her. It said that the results of the requested DNA test results would be known in 2 weeks. The girl was very excited about this. She had been waiting for this answer all her life. With this message, she forgot that she was not alone here. The boy assumed that she had gotten something good. The girl smiled and said something like that. However, her face said that she was insanely happy. Doguk sat thoughtfully and said quietly that he was happy for her. The girl looked at him questioningly. The guy smiled and said he couldn't help her in any way, but he liked her plan, so she should try even harder. Doguk got up from the table. The girl couldn't believe that her plan had failed. How could he refuse? Doguk smiled caustically and told her to propose to him if she wanted to get married so badly. Iju shouted at the whole cafe in bewilderment. What is he even talking about? The guy went on to say that in that case with wedding rings, no kissing. The girl looked at him and couldn't believe he was saying that. Suddenly she started laughing nervously. Iju said that since it was necessary for marriage, of course she would do everything. The girl held out her hand and said that she would do it as many times as needed. Doguk did not expect such a response. Iju looked at him and added that it was a suggestion. Iju drove her car home. She got out of it. The girl looked very pensive. She was thinking about the reason for her grandfather's death and the passing of the whole inheritance to Yura. It's all so horrible. What if the suicide note was forged? Iju went to the door and took hold of the handle. If that's what it is, she owes it to herself to bring the whole truth to the surface. As soon as she crossed the threshold of the house, her eyes were immediately full of terror. The stepmother slapped her hand with all her might. She shouted at the whole house asking why she wasn't picking up the phone and making people worry. The girl, rubbing her cheek, realized that she had been wrong all along. She's not her biological mother after all. These words made the woman cringe and cross her arms. She replied that legally she was still her mother, or had she found someone else? The woman yelled that she had raised her since Iju turned 9. Iju asked what she meant by that. The stepmother asked if she had met Doguk. The girl replied that she had. The woman added that he was also dating Yura. The girl asked, and what's the big deal? The stepmother said that in that case she should know that they were going to have a wedding. What the hell is this girl up to? Iju replied that because a woman and a man who is going to play a wedding should meet more often. The woman shouted and asked if she still believed that she would marry him even though she was adopted. Iju asked if it was okay for Yura to have unlawful sexual intercourse with a man he was not married to. The woman couldn't believe what she heard. She swung around shouting that didn't she realize who was in front of her. The girl abruptly grabbed her mother's hand and said that she knew she had a wonderful stepmother in front of her who had raised her well since she was 9 years old, and added that she would marry him. To Dagaxio, the stepmother was furious. She stuttered and said she didn't know what she was saying. Their conversation was interrupted by a man who came into the room. He shouted at them to stop. The man was displeased with Iju's behavior. He asked how she could talk to her mother like that. The girl looked at her father and didn't know what to say. Damn, this is so unfair. Her stepmother immediately snuggled up to her father and started the house brewing, how worried she was about her and how long she had waited for her to arrive. The woman continued by saying that when Iju came home, she slapped her on the cheek. The girl immediately interrupted, saying that it wasn't like that, but her father shut her up. The man told her to stop. They are sisters after all. It's not nice to see them fighting over a man. The girl clenched her fists and gritted her teeth. Yura started this war. Iju thought for a moment. Indeed, after everything, this Yura again. The father looked at his daughter carefully. She said that even if she started everything, do they think she would just give up and lose to Yura? The man, looking sternly, asked what was she talking about. The girl added that in this house she was not taken for a member of the family at all. She turned to her father. The man looked down at her with a downcast look. The girl tearfully said that she was his daughter too, after all. Iju's father sternly said that she was not like Yura. He thought she was intelligent, but he was disappointed in her. Iju looked at him and didn't know what to answer. The closest person betrayed her. The stepmother apologized and told her husband that it was her fault. She had failed to bring her up well and asked him not to be so hard on her. The man, as he was leaving, turned around and said that she would be home for a while. The shabby Iju remained standing in the same place with her eyes downcast to the floor. The woman sighed lightly and called the two maids to her. They approached Iju and one of them began to remove the bag from her shoulder. She screamed and said she could do it herself. The girl took a cell phone out of the bag. She held out the phone and threatened the maid not to even lay a finger on it. Iju went to her room and her stepmother smiled achidically at this. The girl went into her room and closed the door behind her. So strange. Before her death, she didn't think she would ever come to this place again. But this time she must go. The girl opened her drawer of clothes and started rummaging through it. Scattering the shirts on the floor, she began to tie them together. Iju went to the window and assessed the height. It wasn't high, but it wasn't low either. The girl began to let go of her rope of clothes down. At first everything was fine and she was successful in going down. But at some point her foot slipped and she flew straight to the ground before she could grab the rope. Her eyes were full of fear. She never had time to realize how it happened. Thoughts from the past immediately flashed before her eyes. That terrible moment when she was hit by the car. After that, she squeezed her eyes shut even harder. Could it be death again? At that moment some hand like a savior angel reached out to her. It was their guard who was fortunate enough to be in this place. He caught the girl. After that, he gently placed her on the ground. He looked at her carefully, then got up and asked if she was trying to escape. The guard added that if she wanted revenge, she had better stay in this house and do it here. Iju looked at him bewildered. She was not thinking of revenge. What else did he know? The man corrected his glasses and said that her trying to run away now was not befitting of her. The girl asked not to talk as if he knew everything about her. She asked not to be misunderstood. She wasn't going to run away. The man smiled and offered his hand. The girl's head still hurt and she could barely get to her feet. She asked him to give her phone number. The man reached into his pocket to find it. But before giving it, the man asked what she wanted to do. Iju answered short and clear, to take revenge. He handed her the phone. The girl smiled and said that he himself had told her to stay here, hadn't he? At that moment, the man pressed the intercom button and a voice asked who was there. Dagaxio said hello and introduced himself. In his hands he held a gorgeous bouquet of roses. When the stepmother opened the door, she couldn't believe that what Iju had said had started to come true. The boy smiled and asked her if he could come inside. The whole family sat at the table except for Iju. Dagaxio apologized for not telling them in advance that he was coming. Father stated that if he came because of that article, don't let him worry about it, it's okay. Dagaxio smiled awkwardly and said sorry that the man saw her after all. The same confirmed that he had seen it and added that in their days, articles are already being published even without solid facts and evidence. The fellow replied that it happens when you have to get rid of something, even though it is true. This is where the stepmother couldn't stand it. She wondered if this article was true after all. Dagaxio suddenly looked around and asked where Iju had disappeared to. The stepmother smiled awkwardly and said that Iju had left early in the morning. The guy, taking a sip of coffee, thought it was probably not true. The father stated that he had already had a good talk with Iju, so he might not worry that there would be any problems on this matter. Doguk replied that it was the opposite. He seems to be the one who got Iju involved in all this. Everyone at the table there turned gloomy. Father asked what he was talking about. The guy smiled and said that the article was telling the truth. The guard stood by the door of Iju's room and tried to do everything quietly and discreetly. With 2 stilettos he picked the lock, and after a moment a click was heard which spoke of success. Immediately afterwards he opened Iju's door and said that now was the time. The girl bit her lip and agreed. It's the right time to show the family your character. She walked past the guard and started very quietly on her toes down the hall. The whole family was drinking tea and talking to Doguk, but her stepmother noticed her with the edge of her eye. She was furious. She had locked her in her room. Did she really get out? The girl looked gorgeous. Her hair sparkled in the sunlight, and her homemade dress emphasized her beautiful waist. Suddenly the talking stopped. No one dared to break the silence except Doguk. He smiled and said that Iju must have been here all this time. The stepmother was still furious and the father only frowned. The girl pushed back her chair and sat down beside her future husband. Their gazes met and they smiled. He had come after all, and the girl was glad of it. Ira, looking at this picture, did not understand what was happening. Again the awkward silence was interrupted by Doguk. He declared that he wanted to marry Iju. Both mother and daughter were completely perplexed by his words. The woman asked what he was talking about. Doguk took the girl's hand and asked them in permission. Iju sat next to them and stared at them intently too. All 3 family members sat like a dumbfounded person. They didn't know how to react to those words. The girl squeezed the guy's hand hard and the guy looked at her with a smile on his face. Iju smiled and appealed to her parents to allow them to get married. A dead silence hung between the family members. This request took the head of the family by surprise. At this time, Iju was pleased with herself because there was no way her parents would be able to refuse Sogin Group, which is in 3rd place. The woman asked disappointedly if Doguk changed his mind about marrying Yura and chose Iju. The guy suddenly started talking about how he has no other choice, of course only if he leaves according to his mother's wishes. This part they probably haven't heard yet. The woman asked in surprise if they should discuss marriage with both families. Then she looked more angrily at Doguk and said that let them not expect it to be so easy. Suddenly the guy said that he had made it clear to Yura that he did not want a political marriage. He shifted his gaze to the girl and asked if he was telling the truth. Yura immediately jumped up. The girl didn't know what to reply to Doguk's words, so she couldn't say anything but stammered. Doguk then turned to Iju's father and asked if they thought it was better to marry for love than to burden his daughter with a political marriage. The man nevertheless hesitated. The guy said that his family also feels the same way about it. He wants a real relationship and marriage, not a political one. He then took Iju's hand and said that is why he wants to marry her. Iju's stepmother got very angry and mumbled to herself that there would never be a wedding between Iju and Doguk. Suddenly he changed his emotion and said that she understood what the guy was talking about, but she thought they were in too much of a hurry. Then she looked at her daughter and reminded that she had just recently broken up and therefore she definitely does not realize everything completely, and accordingly she is just not ready for a relationship. Yura finally managed to squeeze something out of herself and said in an uncertain voice that it was true. The sister has been through a lot, so it must be hard for her. The fact that the girl started to agree with her stepmother made Iju very tense. She was a bit stressed out by her sister as before. After that, the head of the family also decided to confirm his wife's words and said that it would probably be best for her to calm down for starters and move on from what had happened. He looked intently at the girl as if into her soul and asked if he was right. Iju's face immediately changed and she lowered her gaze downward. Doguk noticed this and decided to take the girl's hand. Holding her hand, he said that he would help Iju to understand herself and what she wanted. Turning his head toward Iju and Yura's stepmother, the guy said it was his responsibility. Yura was very angry with her sister, for she started prying into her relationship between Doguk. Guy suddenly started talking about how it was noticeable how Iju grew up in a family with a lot of love. Looking at Doguk, Iju realized that the boyfriend realized how she was treated in this house. The guy then looked at Iju's stepmother and said that he didn't even think that she would worry so much. Standing up from the table, the guy said that since they had gotten permission they would be on their way. He turned to Iju and said that it was time to go. He booked them a table at the restaurant. After a while, they were on their way down the road in a fancy car. The girl sitting next to Doguk immediately asked him to name the price without any hesitation. The guy smiled and said he thought he'd already talked about the price. He made a reservation at a restaurant and they headed there. Iju initially thought it was just an excuse to get out of there. She reminded him that she talked about not eating with someone. The guy asked if she could then, in exchange for his help, bring him a meal. The girl sighed heavily. Then the guy said they can go to wherever Iju wants to go. After some more time, they were already sitting at the table and there was delicious food in front of them. Iju was very tense because she was not used to eating in public places where moreover, you are being taken care of. The girl took out her phone and tried to calm down. One way or another she was flipping through the page contentedly and nervously. Suddenly, she finally stopped. In front of her was a correspondence with Sujin, but for some reason she wasn't answering her. Doguk, who was already eating, asked the girl what she was waiting for. Iju said everything was fine. Then the guy asked, "Isn't the girl paying for the food?" Iju raised her head and looked at him in bewilderment. He thought it was strange that the food on her plate had not decreased in any way. The girl assured him that she would eat it all. She cut off a piece of meat and began to bring it to her mouth. Iju looked at the piece with a little doubt. After that, she still put it in her mouth and started chewing it. Her face changed to one of disgust. Nevertheless, she continued chewing and Doguk watched her closely and also gobbled. The girl chewed and thought about the fact that Sujin should have been here before they arrived. So where was she then? Then the girl started to feel a little nauseous. Iju started coughing and so Doguk immediately told her that she didn't have to eat it all. The girl got up and said it was okay. At that very moment a waiter came to their table with the desserts they had prepared. In his hand he had a plate of macaron cakes. They actually looked appetizing, but, judging from Iju's face, which changed to horror immediately after she saw the dessert, says otherwise. Seeing the girl's reaction, Doguk, a little perplexed, asked her what was wrong. Iju at this time began to shake very much, and at this very moment she was immersed in memories. In her memory, there was a woman who offered her the same dessert and told the girl to open her mouth. Iju, without thinking long, ate it and with a surprised look on her face told her mother that it was very. She didn't have time to finish, for her face immediately changed to one of horror and pain. The girl fell to the ground exhaustedly and began to call her mother, trying to understand what was happening. Holding her throat, she coughed loudly. Something seemed to be eating away at her throat. She asked why it tasted so strange. The woman hovered over her and asked why Iju calls her mom. The girl can only address her as auntie or ma'am. Once again Iju comes back to reality and sees this horrible dish in front of her. That time the dessert was poisoned and the woman, just because she disliked Iju, gave it to her. Doguk asked the girl what she was thinking about. A little upset, Iju said that everything was fine. She silently turned her head to the side and looked at the evening city. Suddenly the guy said that if nothing else, he would take dessert. The girl began to look at Doguk again. As soon as he took the bite, it was as if the girl almost fainted. She wouldn't stop looking at him, so Doguk assumed she had bad memories. Then, he swallowed the dessert he was eating, and the girl kept looking at him expecting something scary. But then Doguk only smiled and told the girl that if she remembered something bad, she could share it with him. Iju was surprised, but she was pleased to hear these words. Moreover, it was something new for her, because not many people were worried about her. After that, the guy looked around and told the girl that this was a good place to propose. He looked at her and asked if she had prepared wedding rings and a kiss. The girl was a little surprised, for she thought he was joking when he said this. Doguk got up from his chair and smiled. As he thought, the girl did not. At that moment, the guy knelt down in front of Iju, who didn't understand what was happening now. The guy pulled a box out of his pocket. The girl started asking what he was doing, to which Doguk said that right now he was making a real proposal. Opening the box, inside was a diamond ring that was literally glowing. A guy asked a girl to marry him. After that, he changed his mind and asked the question, "Would Iju marry him?" In a moment, a fancy ring was sparkling on the girl's finger. Iju suddenly asked if the guy knew she was zoophobic. Doguk interjected in bewilderment. The girl explained in a raised tone that she is a person who does not kiss for hygiene purposes and does not like uncleanliness. The guy laughed and asked what then about the evening they had had. Getting up from the table, pleased with herself, Iju said it was just business. Doguk smiled and started to say that since it was only business, in that case. At that moment the girl's hands grabbed the guy's shirt. She interrupted him and said that since she had not proposed, she had prepared a kiss. Iju abruptly pulled Doguk to her and kissed him tenderly. The boy was completely bewildered. To kiss Doguk, the girl had to stand on her toes. After a moment, the guy's eyes changed. He realized what was happening and he started to like it. Then their lips, which had literally just been inseparable, did separate. The girl pulled away and embarrassedly said that was enough for now. At that very moment Doguk grabbed her by the waist and arm and pulled her to him. He asked in surprise, did he seem less good at kissing her? The girl's eyes opened more and more with each passing second. This time Doguk pulled Iju to him and kissed her. The guy gently held her neck. The action moved to the office. It was a bright sunny day outside. Doguk was actively browsing the social news feed in search of something interesting. Suddenly he found a picture of him and Iju kissing together. Did he really get caught again? At that moment, a secretary appeared out of nowhere and told the director that he was a celebrity. Iju jumped up in surprise. The guy said that despite the news, he is still a celebrity and now even the secretary is talking to a celebrity. The guy sighed and said he understood him. Doguk remarked that that sounded pretty rude. Continuing to look something up on his tablet, the guy said it wasn't. Anyway, he asked if he should write to Sujin and ask him to delete the article. That is, should he call and sweetly ask for the article to be removed, or should he cut off Sujin's middle finger and bring it to the principal? Doguk tensed up and said that the first option was definitely necessary, and he didn't even think about the second one. Suddenly the guy got a notification on his phone. When he opened the notification, he saw a message from Iju, who offered him to have lunch together. Such a message made the guy speechless. Iju-han wants to have lunch together. Doguk of course wrote that he was all for it, so he would wait for her. After that, he turned off the phone and leaned it against his side. Finally, one of his dreams had come true. Then he turned to the secretary and asked his opinion. If a girl offers to have dinner together, doesn't that mean she's interested in him? The guy thought for a while and said that she probably was. Doguk asked in bewilderment if he was wrong. The secretary relented and asked if he could tell the truth. Of course, Doguk said to tell him the truth. Then the guy asked if he could speak to the director without subordination or if he could speak as his wife's brother. Doguk thought for a while and said that the secretary could speak as a brother-in-law. That is, as a brother of the wife. The guy said that in his opinion the blood flowing in Doguk's veins is not really blood, but kimchi juice. To put it bluntly, it's too early to rejoice. The director was shocked to hear that. Immediately the secretary said that he would try to get rid of the article as soon as possible. His actions were stopped by the words of Doguk, who said that it was not necessary. The boy looked up and was surprised. The director got up from his seat and looking at the phone screen said that he was getting married. He is getting married to that beautiful girl from the article Sujin made. The guy was coming out of his office and heading towards the exit where Iju should already be standing. He said to himself that it was best to avoid before prying. Suddenly, someone started calling him. Thinking it was Iju, he raised his head joyfully. To his surprise, Yura was standing in front of him, smiling broadly at Doguk. Immediately, the girl started walking towards the director of the company to meet him. And once again the memories came back. Little Iju stood aside and rubbed the ground with the toe of her sneaker. Looking at her lonely sister, Yura wanted to approach her. She started to do so, but she only managed to take one step, and then her mom grabbed her. The woman once again showed the whole area, which was truly huge. She told her daughter that everything here now belonged to Yura. Then she pointed to the sad Iju and said that she was not real. But Yura, unlike her, is actually real. It wasn't the first time the woman had talked about something like this, and each time she asked if her daughter understood. Walking towards Doguk, Yura thought about the fact that all the things her mom said were actually true. She is the real deal. And now, the girl was already standing in front of the guy and thinking about how Iju doesn't deserve him. Breaking the silence, the girl said hello to Doguk and reminded him that it was soon lunchtime. Yura said that if Doguk didn't have any plans, they could have lunch together. Looking questioningly at Yura, the boy asked if she was talking about him. The girl smiled and said that she had come to meet him and have lunch with him. Realizing that she had come for a reason, Doguk asked her if she wanted to eat or get married at the same time. From such a question, the girl fell into a stupor, for the guy was still guessing. Despite this, just a moment later, like her mother, Yura changed her expression and with a smile on her face she said that they would eat first and then they could get married. The girl sank back into her memories. Everything in that house had been Yura's since the first day she'd come there. Everything in the WJ retail family belonged to Yura. She always had tons of gifts for the holidays. The girl was not inferior to anyone or anything. She always received enough love from her tycoon father, even the very ideal and societally imposed image of family she had, because it was really all about furthering her legacy. She wasn't going to cede it to anyone. From the very beginning, Yura-han was not going to share it with her obsessive and perpetually disgruntled sister, Doguk Seo. The girl began to remember the very moment of their acquaintance. One day, the angry girl was flipping through the social media feed and didn't understand why it was so late. Suddenly, a pleasant male voice called out to her and she turned her head. In front of her stood a tall and handsome brunette who immediately apologized for being late. In her opinion, he was different from any man she had ever met before. Looking into his eyes for the first time, Yura realized that he was the man who had everything she wanted. They talked together for a long time and discussed various topics. For example, Yura said that she thought it was right to marry people who had the same status and got along well together. Doguk sipped coffee and said that it was. The guy then put the mug on the table and said that he wanted to be honest with her. Doguk did not have a single thought about getting married. The girl jumped up in bewilderment and questioned him. Standing up from the table, he said that he didn't even have a choice, because he had to go to the meeting only at his mother's request. Yura in bewilderment began to try to correct his opinion. Doguk interrupted her and bluntly said that he did not want a political marriage. That is what he should have clarified. Nevertheless, even the lips that spoke the wounding words seemed very attractive to Yura. Saying something in his wake, she realized that this was the man she wanted to get. Biting her lip, she decided to herself that Doguk Seo would definitely be her husband. By all means. But, thinking back to that day when Yura couldn't even find the words, she began to not understand. Why were Iju and Doguk together? Why were they kissing that day? Why did he go to their house to meet the family, but asked permission to marry Iju on the same day? Looking at their hands holding each other, Yura couldn't keep herself in control. She was not herself that day. She was trying to understand why things were like this and why he chose Iju over her. Holding her trembling hands and fists, Yura realized that she couldn't take him away so easily. And so, the girl came back to reality. Just then she told Doguk that they should eat first and then they could get married. An annoyed Doguk scratched his neck and said he wasn't going to do either of those things. Smiling and looking directly into Doguk's eyes, Yura said that she would like a wedding. The boy averted his gaze. He didn't understand why Yura was bothering him so much. Then he turned to her again and said that it was an awkward situation. He already has a girlfriend to marry. Surprised, Yura asked Doguk if he was really going to marry her sister. The guy folded his arms and laughed. As far as he understood correctly, Yura was now trying to stop him. The girl suddenly started shouting to the whole floor that Iju has a favorite person. She said that Iju is just mad at her and is trying to get revenge, so she is using Doguk for her revenge. The guy looked up and asked the girl in surprise, does she really think that if he and Iju don't get married, Yura should be the next option? The girl expected definitely not that answer, and so she looked at the guy with horror in her eyes. At this time, all the people in the building were looking at them. Doguk told the girl that he would like to praise Yura's arrogance. Then he looked at his watch, apologized, and added that he had no time to listen to Yura's tales. The boy immediately began to move toward the exit, saying he had to go. Yura immediately turned around and tried to do something about it, but at that moment Doguk said that he already had a person with whom he was going to have lunch. The girl asked who it was. Suddenly he stopped and asked if Yura really had no idea who he was talking about. He turned around and with a smile on his face said that he was going to have lunch with a girl who had a hard time eating. The action is moved back a few hours to the WJ retail estate. At this time only Iju woke up, and that only because someone called her. The girl started to reach for the phone and tried to understand who was calling so early. Asleep, she picked up the phone and tried to see something. Suddenly the girl's eyes opened wide with shock. Someone sent her a picture of her kissing Doguk and asked if it was a good picture. As the person said, her brother was preparing the ring and she helped him a little. Suddenly the girl jumped up and started remembering everything that happened that night and what she sees now. Iju remembered last night when Doguk ended up proposing himself and pulled her in for a kiss. Covering her mouth with her hand, the girl realized that he had prepared all this in advance. The action moves to the Doguk building. Sad Iju went to the meeting and couldn't forget what she had seen in the morning. All these thoughts were bothering her. She tried to regain consciousness by telling herself that it was just business. Most likely he had made the offer for a reason too, but it was business. If you think about it that way, it probably doesn't really matter who started it first. At that moment some guy turned around and looked surprised. He immediately started calling out to Iju, who was hovering in her thoughts. The girl raised her head. In front of her was Sayok, her ex-husband, who was asking what she was doing here. The girl was not happy about this meeting in any way. She didn't want to see this man. Iju lowered her head and just walked past the surprised Sayok. The guy immediately grabbed her and asked her if she came to meet Director Seo by chance. He asked if they were really going to get married. Iju abruptly pulled out her hand and said that it was right. They would be married soon. Sayok started screaming and asking the girl what happened to her. He wanted to know what was wrong. The girl laughed. What's the matter? She said she knew that Sayok was in love with Yura. The guy was really shocked by those words. He didn't know what to say or how the girl knew it. Iju expected such a reaction, so other than a perplexed face, she had no hope. Turning around, she told him to go and talk to Yura and he might not come near her. The guy looking at his ex-wife's back said that she had really changed a lot. Iju immediately turned to him and said that she hadn't changed a bit. But Sayok, who felt nothing from the beginning and is now trying to do something about it, has changed. The guy was shocked by these words and he really didn't understand how the girl knew all this. He recalled coming home right after Iju broke up with him and told him that they had dissolved the marriage. Grandpa couldn't believe his ears. He once again questioned what had happened. A frustrated Sayok started repeating what he had just said but couldn't finish. At that moment, the man's hand went up and then hit the guy in the face with all speed. The man told Sayok that he was nothing. He didn't understand how the guy couldn't hold on to the girl. Is dissolution of marriage the only thing to do now? Sayok looked at the family in horror. His mom, who was just as horrified as his grandfather, came over and asked what they should do now. With tears in her eyes, she asked her son what to do now with the deposit for the store. She pounced on him and kept asking what they should do now, when suddenly another voice came from outside. It was already Sayok's sister asking what about her fancy bag and the GG dress. A whole bunch of promises and wishes from the family fell on the guy's shoulders. They told him to return Iju at any cost. Looking down, Sayok was just trying to figure out how things could have turned out like this and at what point. The actions are moved to another place. The guy was outside talking to Yura. The girl suddenly said that Sayok was like family to her. The boy happily interrogated her. The girl held his hand and talked about how cool it would be if they became one family. A confused Seok said he agreed with her. At the same moment, Yura said that they could become a family if he married her sister. The boy asked again in bewilderment. He didn't understand what Yura was talking about and what her sister had to do with it. The girl held his hand and asked him in surprise, "Doesn't he want to marry Iju?" Seok looked very surprised at the girl who was sweet-talking and hanging out with him, and now asking to marry her sister. Nevertheless, the guy turned his head away and said gravely that he agrees to marry Iju. The girl became even happier in no time and started telling the guy that he was the best. In fact, Seok realized that he had no other choice but to be closer to Yura. Once again, he remembered that night of confession. The night Seok spent time with Iju. It was then, looking out the window, that she talked about not being able to sleep with another person. She talked about not being able to share a room or a bed with anyone. The boyfriend smiled and said he was fine with it. He still wants to be with her. Somehow, looking at the floor, he realized that everything turned out just like Iju said. And maybe it's even for the best. There was just one thing that was stressing him out. One afternoon, Yura asked Seok to come to her as soon as possible. As soon as the girl got into the car, the guy started asking what happened and why she needed him so suddenly. Without thinking long, the girl started yelling that Iju was going to marry Doguk Seo. Yura grabs Seok by his jacket and asks him for help because he's on her side. She started telling him that she knows Iju still cares about her, and what's more, she likes him too. So the girl tearfully begged him to bring Iju back. Disappointedly looking down, he asked whether Yura would marry Doguk in that case. The girl sighed heavily and, already with tears in her eyes, said that she would have to, because it was all for the family business. In his head, Seok realized that the girl was lying. He asked her why she was pretending as if Doguk didn't like her. Yura started shouting that she needs this guy, and Seok himself realizes it perfectly well. Sighing heavily, the guy once again realized that he simply had no other choice. Seok agreed and said that he would convince Iju to come back to him. Yura immediately changed her face and started thanking the guy. Looking at the happy Yura, Seok thought that if this is the only way to make her happy, then that's what they will do. The action shifted to the hospital. It was a sunny and bright day outside, which meant it was safe to go to get the tests. Iju did just that. She left the building holding an envelope with the results of the analysis. Finally stopping, the girl decided she couldn't wait any longer. She opened the envelope now. As soon as she started reading, her face changed from interest to shock. As it turns out, Han, who the girl came to see, is 99.9% Iju's father. The girl put down the envelope and tried to come to her senses. She couldn't how this happened. Then she abruptly raised her head and realized something important. Most likely that unpleasant woman, Jeong-hai, knew about it. As it turned out, even the will was a forgery. Her whole life had been a fraud. The girl looked up at the sky and laughed hysterically, with her tears not intentionally rolling down her cheeks. It pained her to realize that this was the kind of news she would learn after the death of her real father, Han. After a while, the girl stood in front of the house. No doubt the journey home was not easy for her. Just as Iju started to pull out her keys, someone called out to her from behind. It was the horrible relatives of her ex-husband Seok. As always, they forced a smile and pretended to care about Iju's mood. The girl looked at them with disdain and asked what was the matter. Why did they come here? The boy's mother started talking about what she had heard about the dissolution of the marriage. The woman couldn't find the words, but they came to visit Iju because everyone was getting worried. The girl didn't react in any way, but Seok's mom kept pestering her with questions. She was trying to figure out what happened. Did they have a fight with Seok? Then the woman waved her hand and told her to ignore them. Sehui nodded at her mom. She kept getting on her nerves, saying that all people fight all the time before they get married, so whether they got married or not, it's perfectly normal. Iju was already getting stressed by this company. Suddenly Sehui came up to her and took her hand, saying that they could go out to eat together, and then maybe her mood would lift. The girl did not think long and immediately knocked out her hand and made it clear that she was not going anywhere. The woman then decided to say something about the contract. She wanted to even return it already, and moreover she had taken out a loan. Then she sighed and said that everything was going wrong at the wrong time. Iju said a firm no without any emotion and advised the woman to find a job. She turned and said that was the end of it. They had nothing more to talk about. Iju had just started walking when suddenly, a woman grabbed her arm and started asking if Iju wanted her to apologize. She begged the girl to think a little more about this marriage, even though she doesn't know what happened between them, but as she thought not all is lost yet. Looking at her ex-husband's family, Iju said that they no longer had anything to do with her. The girl, after these words, still turned to the door and started to open the door. Just in case, she once again said that she was not going to marry Seok. Seok's mom said that she understood her, but she hoped that their promise was still valid. Iju turned around in bewilderment and looked questioningly at the woman who was reaching out to her. At this point, she fell to her knees and continued to plead with Iju, saying that there was still something she could do, and she would definitely give it all back later. The girl directly asked her how she was going to return the money. The woman looked away a little embarrassed and forlorn. Iju sighed and said that they may not come back to her. Once again she turned around, removed her foot, and went to the door with the words that they had better talk to her son. The shabby woman looked down, and Sehui asked her in horror what they should do now. Suddenly, Seok's mom started grinding her teeth and decided she had had enough. Immediately, she grabbed the girl by the hair and started pulling her towards her. The woman decided to tell her everything that had been brewing for a long time. She was disappointed that Iju didn't even remember her birthday. As she continued to yell, she talked about how Iju was an ill-mannered girl who didn't know the basic rules of etiquette. Iju tried to do something about it, but she couldn't do anything. At that moment, she started looking around and saw something. They had a security camera. That's what could have saved her. Realizing that they were out of frame now, the girl decided that she needed to stand a little to the left. She began to back away little by little, thinking that there was just a little more to go and this nightmare would be over. Suddenly, Sehui stood between Seok's mom and Iju and tried to stop the woman. She was already very angry at that time. At the last moment, the woman decided to put a stop to their conflict, and so she swung her arm. A moment later, the hand flew in front of the girl and then silence hung over them. The enraged woman was quite herself. She looked greedily at Iju, whom she had just struck. Of course, this action did not offend the girl in any way. Moreover, it made her laugh, for now the most interesting part was about to begin. Lifting her hair and showing her bruise, Iju asked Sehui and her mom if they understood what had just happened. Changing her facial expression to a rougher and more confident one, the girl said in a gruff tone that a manhandling had just occurred. The angry woman was asking what Iju was carrying when suddenly her daughter started calling out to her and trying to bring her to her senses. As soon as the woman paid attention to her, Sehui immediately pointed her finger somewhere. Looking up, they saw a camera in front of them. Iju laughed and said that it was right, they were in the frame. It only meant that she would have fun now. She asked how they liked the situation. Iju was ready to go to the police like that. Then looking at the woman and Sehui, Iju asked if she should turn off the camera. They started yelling for the girl to clean it up. And then Sehui started pulling her mom home. Iju exhaled with peace of mind. Finally, this horror was over. Right on the doorstep was a guy who stood at the doorstep asking Iju how she was doing. She immediately asked who he came from. Was it from Grandpa? The guy silently nodded back at her. Iju asked how he was doing now, and the guy immediately said he was doing much better. The girl then asked if they could come to Seoul. The bodyguard said he didn't know if it was possible. Iju thought for a while and looked at the guy walking behind her. Suddenly, he turned around and asked if it was true that Iju was getting married. The girl was surprised at the question and a little lost. But then she remembered what he was talking about and confirmed the words. He looked at the girl without any emotion. Then he said that he hoped that this man was a worthy replacement for Seok. Iju looked at him a little puzzled. This guy had actually said some pretty strange things before. For example, the moment he caught Iju falling down, or the moment when he advised the girl to stay home if she really wanted revenge. Then she remembered the day of her death, that very moment when she was sitting in the car and heard the call. On the phone screen, after all, there were messages from Seok and a missed one from Ju and Hyun. She couldn't understand why he was calling then and just ignored the notification. The action moves to a small but cute restaurant. Doguk was just opening the door and walking in. Immediately, they started calling him. There was a woman and the rest of the people in front of him. The whole family was gathered. Almost. As he sat down at the table, he immediately heard the words that someone from here had already seen the article. Doguk's mother said that she had never dreamed that her son would finally find a good bride. The guy smiled and immediately decided to talk about the gift he wanted for himself. Doguk's sister joined the conversation and said that Doguk is probably going crazy. The boy interrupted them and started his story about the girl he likes, even though they already knew a lot of things about her. The woman smiled and said that she had heard that this Iju, the girl, was not a decent girl. His mom reminded that WJ Retail is very different from them. She then asked if Iju was an orphan by any chance. The guy took the glass in his hands and thought that Iju was far from being someone to talk about like that. Suddenly the guy said something and Doguk's mother arrived in shock. She immediately began to say that there would be no such thing. His father was not embarrassed by this, so he took a sip of coffee and said that the guy could do whatever he wanted. Abruptly, the woman slammed her fist on the table and started yelling. The man asked her not to yell in his ear. She tried to say that this was not a game but a real marriage. After all, neither Jeongwook or Dona acted like this. The guy's father kept saying that it was only Doguk's choice. Looking at his parents' quarrel, Doguk only thought about the fact that he had actually been doing everything by himself since he was a child. Smiling, he realized that he was deciding for himself while his parents didn't care about him. Deciding to leave already, Doguk wished his family a pleasant appetite. At that moment, Dona was surprised and said that another older brother was coming. There was a joyful guy on the doorstep who was surprised that everyone was already there. Then the guy laughed and asked if he was late by chance. His father said that he had come at the right time, so let him pass. The boy thanked him and went forward. Doguk looked away. Apparently he was not so happy about his brother's arrival. Once again the action moves to the house of WJ Retail. At that time Iju was sitting on her cozy bed and reading a book, as suddenly she heard the sound of the door opening and jumped up. In front of Iju stood Yura. The girl immediately asked what happened. Immediately Yura said that Sayok had come and was waiting for Iju. The angry girl interrogated Sayok. She didn't want to see him. She wondered if the guy seemed to have forgotten that he betrayed her. Then she asked what he wanted from her. Yura said that the guy came to see Iju and talk. She asked what she should do. Let him in or tell him to leave. And of course Iju told him to leave. She has nothing to talk to him about. Iju's insolent sister said she'd let him in anyway. The girl immediately looked up with a perplexed look. Literally moments later, the guy peeked out from behind the door and smiled at the girl. Walking into the room, he said hello to her. No longer trying to hold her anger, Iju asked why he didn't understand her words. She then asked if Yura had asked her to be so annoying by chance. The guy was very surprised at such words. Not hearing any reply, Iju realized that it was true. She sighed heavily and kept silent. Sayok approached her and asked what he could do to get her to come back to him. The guy touched Iju's hand and said that he knew that she was mad at him and he apologized for that. He promised the girl that he wouldn't hurt her again, and so the girl, without trying to listen to his words, pulled her hand out and told him to get the hell out of this house. The guy looked down pitifully and said that she shouldn't marry Doguk Seo because it would break his heart. Iju, from such insolence and bewilderment, only asked what he was talking about. Sayok said that he would pretend it didn't happen. The guy fell on his knees at that moment and proposed to the girl. Iju jumped at this turn of events and asked what he was doing. Looking at the girl with crazy eyes, the guy said that she realizes everything. He still likes her. The girl looked into Sayok's eyes with a certain amount of disgust and distrust. She immediately remembered that very day. The girl remembered all her feelings and emotions that had run before her the last time. She remembered that couple in love, her sister and her ex-husband, who was so worried about her and swore his love for her. After these thoughts, the girl only started smiling madly. She told the guy that it was just an abomination. It was funny for her to watch Sayok trying to pretend that he cared, and she wanted to pretend it didn't happen, right? She looked angrily into the guy's eyes and said it was all his fault. Sayok looked at the girl again and started talking about how she wasn't like that. At that moment, something small flew into him. The guy picked it up and immediately asked what it was. Iju said that his family came to see her the other day. The guy looked up in horror and asked her again. Iju nodded and said that this flash drive had all the evidence of what they had done. Immediately she warned him that any action with the flash drive was unwise. It's just a copy. Looking at the disappointed Sayok, the girl asked him not to annoy him anymore. Next time, she will go to the police station without a second thought and hand over all the records. The guy looked helplessly at the girl and realized that there was no other answer to be expected. Just like Mom, he started grinding his teeth and thinking something bad. Nevertheless, the boy silently jumped up and flew out of the room like a bullet. At that time, Yura was walking down the corridor carrying a tray of water. Apparently it was meant for Sayok and Iju. The girl looked at him in bewilderment as he shouldn't have left the room so quickly. The angry Sayok didn't even look in Yura's direction. He rushed past her with the same speed. The girl turned around in bewilderment and realized that he had most likely failed. Now it was up to her to act. Going into the room, she immediately told her sister that her thoughts were giving her no rest. Sitting down across from her, she said that it was not the first day that she had been trying to understand what had happened to them. She did not understand why her sister had supported her when she went to meet Doguk. Iju had said that time that it would work out. Yura asked if her sister had lied to her. Iju looked at her in bewilderment and thought that she could have said such a thing, of course, because it was before her death and awakening. Suddenly she asked Yura if something seemed strange to her. The girl was puzzled and asked what it was. The way they were treated differently. Iju was constantly ignored and scolded, but Yura was encouraged and pleased. The girl asked her sister if she thought it was strange. Yura suddenly thought to herself and remembered her mother's words that she was real and Iju was just a fake. At this moment, the girl once again asked why she was treated like this. Could it be because she was from an orphanage? Yura's eyes immediately opened wide. The girl took her sister's hand and said that she knew how hard it was for her because of her parents. Iju started smiling and talking about how Yura doesn't really know anything at all, at least nothing that Iju knows. The girl smiled and once again told her sister that she has been through a lot, so she may not hold herself back now. Iju can do what she wants to do. Iju liked this sentence and asked again if it was true that she could do what she wanted. Yura said yes without a doubt. The girl nodded, took the glass in her hands, and said that Yura was definitely right. After a moment, she splashed water towards her sister and after a while, Yura was already flooded with water. The girl was horrified and started asking what Iju was doing. She in turn laughed and said that Yura herself had given her permission to not hold back and do what she wanted. The girl thanked her sister and said that was all she needed. Ira looked at her sister in bewilderment. Coming a little closer, Iju let her sister know that this was just the beginning, because the worst for Ira was just ahead. The girl promised that Dongak would be her husband. Ira is terrified and starts screaming that Iju can't be with him. The girl looked down on her sister and told her not to be jealous. Ira started yelling again and trying to find out what happened between her and Sayok. They were going to get married after all, and Iju liked him. The girl said without any emotion that she knew he was in love with her sister. That's why she decided to call it off. He knew how cruel he was being to Iju. Ira suddenly arrived in total shock and she didn't know what to say in response to this. Iju smiled again and said that she would listen to her sister's advice. That's why she will do it the way she wants to do it herself. Ira suddenly started asking if a girl would marry him without any feelings. You can't use a person like that. Iju laughed and asked who else is playing with feelings. She really likes Dongak. She loves him. Ira, those words pissed and hurt the most. She couldn't control herself anymore. At that moment, the girl grabbed a glass of water and poured it all on Iju. In the end, they were both wet from head to toe. The interesting thing was that unlike the distraught Ira, Iju felt victorious and only smiled. At that moment, a male voice called out to them and said that the girls scared him. A perplexed Dongak stood in the aisle and asked if all the sisters were fighting. Not realizing how long ago he had come, the girls blushed with embarrassment. The boy stood perplexed and said he had come on an important matter. Entering the room, he said that he had not thought before that he was so often discussed here. Dongak took out a napkin and began to wipe Iju, saying that she was soaking wet. Ira, watching this, was very angry, because she also wanted Dongak to take care of her. In her opinion, Iju just didn't deserve the way the guy treated her. He then asked the girl if she was okay. Iju looked carefully into his eyes. After that, she turned her head and in the doorway she saw her stepmother, who was incredibly angry. This expression on her face made the girl's mood rise and she said she wasn't very well. Taking Dongak's hands in hers, she said that all was really not well. She pulled him to her and asked the boy to hug him. Dongak stood puzzled and looked at her. After a while, the loving couple was already sitting in the car. Meanwhile, it was raining heavily outside. Looking at the road, Dongak noticed that Iju was a good actress. The girl sighed and said that she had to do it. After that, they drove in silence. Iju turned her head and watched the passing objects. Suddenly, Dongak interrupted the silence and said that he actually had a similar situation with his older brother. The girl was surprised by these words and she immediately turned around. The guy explained his words by saying that they have different mothers. In front of others, he pretends to be nice and kind, so everyone thinks he is right and perfect. But in reality, they just don't know the real appearance. Iju was trying to remember her older brother's name. What was his name? Suddenly she remembered. It was Jeongwak-seo. Dongak said that man was not perfect at all. With an angry look in the distance, he said that his brother is not sincere with anyone, but only with him he is genuine. Iju didn't know what to say to Dongak's story. She simply had no words. There was silence again. Nevertheless, they were still driving in the heavy rain. The girl looked at Dongak. He was quite serious and reliable. He never said anything unnecessary. Looking at him, Iju only thought about how handsome he was. Suddenly the girl coughed and asked where they were going for so long. The guy started laughing and answered her that she had decided to ask that question rather late. Pointing to a building, he said that this was their new home in which they would live. The girl started screaming in bewilderment, asking if he had just picked her up and brought her here. Dongak told her that if they didn't like it, they could just leave. Iju did not want to follow him. The guy didn't leave his own and told the girl to follow him anyway. No need to freak out unnecessarily. And so they were already standing in front of the door. Their apartment was on the 5th floor. Suddenly Dongak asked Iju if she remembered the day at the hotel. The girl asked again in bewilderment. The guy smiled and said that the password was the date when they met at the hotel. A little frustrated and tired, the girl asked if the date also had a meaning. Opening the door, the guy said that certainly it had a meaning. After all, it was their first night together. The girl stopped on the threshold and in utter horror began to remember that night. But the night on that vindictive day was still more or less normal, which she couldn't say about the morning and the lipstick mark on her neck. Back to reality, the girl decided that it should be forgotten as soon as possible. Then the beautiful decorations of the apartment itself immediately caught my eye. The renovation had been done to perfection. The girl was puzzled and asked if Dongak really lived here. The guy said that he lived here and asked what she did not like. Iju was shocked by the apartment. She only said that she liked everything. At that moment, one room caught her eye. Inside it, everything was in pink colors. She asked in bewilderment why it was all pink. The guy didn't understand the question at first and then said that it was Iju's room. She cried out in bewilderment. Looking at the cute bear and the rest of the decorations, Dongak was proud of himself. He liked this renovation. Of course, that couldn't be said for the girl, who was shocked to say the least. Immediately, she started laughing non-stop and asking whose idea it was. In a slight misunderstanding, the guy kept looking at her. Iju thanked the guy for preparing for her arrival, but she wondered why he chose the color pink. It's so stereotypical after all. The guy immediately decided to say that he didn't really think about it, but if he told her more about it, his sister highly recommended this style, which was suggested by his secretary and his wife. What's more, it gained 100 likes on Stargram. Frustratedly looking away, he said that if she didn't like it, he could change the room. This time he would not ask his sister but Iju. The girl immediately tensed up and said it was fine with the room. Deciding not to stay in the same room for long, they went on. Next they looked at the kitchen. The girl looked around surprised and said she liked the interior. Doguk smiled and told the girl to sit down at the table and he would cook something now. Iju suddenly changed her face and asked in complete horror if he was going to cook. The boy said that he would cook because she had not eaten anything today. The girl immediately reminded him that she doesn't eat with someone together. She was upset that Doguk had forgotten about it, or maybe even had not remembered it at all. The guy tying his apron said he remembered. And what's more, he cooks much better than in the most expensive hotels. Iju still continued to stand her ground and said that she does not eat food cooked by other people. Of course, the guy asked why Iju had such principles. She just looked at Doguk with a frown. Afterward, she looked down frustrated and said it was all because you can't trust anyone. The girl again remembered the moment from her childhood when a seemingly ordinary dessert from her stepmother turned out to be poison. Every time Iju remembers this situation, she gets a shiver. After that moment, she stopped trusting the people who gave her food. Doguk directly asked the girl what the words "can't trust" meant. They offended him a little. Looking at the girl's surprised face, he asked if she was afraid that he would poison her. The guy asked in bewilderment why they are going to get married if Iju doesn't even trust him. The girl immediately reminded him that they are only in a business relationship and they don't have to be subservient to each other. Doguk in turn reminded the girl that she should get married. Not understanding what this was about, she asked him again. Doguk again said that she did not trust him so much that she could not even eat his food. Iju thought for a moment. Looking at the pensive girl, the guy told her not to worry. He will let her check what he is doing. After a while, he was already in the middle of cooking and chopping vegetables. The girl watched the cooking process intently and tried to understand why he was doing it. The guy suddenly called out and asked if she wanted to beat her sister. Iju tensed up at just the mere mention of Yura. No doubt the girl wanted to defeat her. The guy continued cooking and suddenly asked if Iju remembered exactly what she had to do for that. She asked a little uncomprehendingly what exactly she had to do. Doguk smiled and said that she should love him. If the girl loves him, he will love her in return. Iju was a little surprised. Sighing, she said that this was a total nonsense. The guy laughed and asked her not to say that, because it was from the bottom of her heart. The girl said it was very funny. Nevertheless, what's the point? Doguk continued cooking. The girl suddenly asked why he could say that to her. Doguk turned around and directly asked the girl a question. Who would she be able to fool with her poor acting skills? Iju was puzzled. The guy started listing all the people she should be fooling, showing off her acting skills. Yura, Jeonghai, and even the financiers. All of them aren't so naive. Therefore, there is only one way to credibly and well deceive them all. He smiled and said that everything should be real and the girl should be real. After hearing everything from Doguk, Iju sighed heavily and said she understood him. Summarizing, the girl told him to pretend to love her. The main thing is just not to act too fake. The guy laughed and told her that she was very confident from the looks of it. Looking proudly at Doguk, Iju put her hand on her heart and said that she is confidence itself. He said that in that case he would look forward to her real game. Doguk at this time was almost finished cooking. The second side was also almost ready. Looking at the plate, the girl still couldn't understand what he was cooking so hard for. Finally, the guy presented his dish. It's a risotto with a ballon cream. The dish looked truly appetizing. The girl looked at this work of art in bewilderment. At that moment, Doguk handed her a silver spoon. Taking it in her hands, the girl looked at the guy questioningly and asked why she wanted the silver spoon. Doguk explained that if she had suspicions, she could check it with the spoon. Looking at the plate, the guy said that he was sure that Iju had seen the whole cooking process, and therefore knows that he definitely didn't use poison. The girl sighed and told him not to joke like that, because it's not funny. The guy, who didn't take his eyes off Iju, suddenly became very tense. He saw how much the girl's hand was shaking. Was she really that scared? In general, the girl's feeling was not the best. Looking at her appearance, one could say without a doubt that she was dizzy. Doguk abruptly approached her and said that this would not do. Iju looked at him in bewilderment. The guy scooped up a spoonful of food and took it into his mouth, trying to show her that there was nothing wrong with the food. The girl didn't understand what was going on and asked him what he was doing. After a moment, the guy slapped the spoon on the table and said he was only confirming. He visibly swallowed his food and then smiled and told the girl to look at him. As far as she could see, he was fine, still just as perplexed and partly in shock. Iju continued to look at the guy. Doguk looked her straight in the eyes and told her that she could trust him now. Though no, she couldn't, rather she should trust him. The guy asked why Iju is silent, to which the girl asked him to stop talking about it. A bewildered Doguk asked again just in case to realize that he hadn't misheard. The girl started yelling at him, asking if he thought it was all forced. The guy looked guiltily into the girl's eyes and apologized. He would never have thought it was forced. Doguk said that he just wanted to have dinner with her, so he apologizes if she thinks he's forcing her. The girl looked into his eyes and said that this is exactly how it appeared to her. And then the girl said she wasn't hungry, except her stomach didn't agree with that. At that very second, it rumbled all over the kitchen. Iju immediately blushed, and the guy said that if she didn't want to eat then she didn't have to. He took the plate away and apologized again for making Iju feel forced. Looking after Doguk, the girl actually had no idea that he would apologize so much. At that moment, the guy walked over to the trash can and just dumped out all the contents of the plate. Seeing this, Iju just opened her mouth wide and didn't know what to say. She immediately ran up to the guy in bewilderment and asked what he was doing. Doguk also looked at her questioningly. He said that since she didn't like it, he decided to throw it away. She hates being forced to eat, doesn't she? Iju was even more shocked. The guy said he thought it seemed so Iju just didn't like it. The girl said that even if she didn't like it, he shouldn't do that. Doguk explained his actions by saying that he was advised to have dinner, for having dinner together helps to bond. But since things did not go according to plan, he sincerely apologizes for the misunderstanding. He tells the girl to go and rest, and he will tidy up the kitchen in the meantime. The girl lowered her gaze and felt not very good. After all, Doguk only made this dinner because he wanted to be closer to her. Suddenly, Iju noticed again how the guy was about to throw away the plate of food he was cooking. She immediately ran and stopped him. The guy jumped up a little from this abruptness. He asked Iju what was wrong. She thought to herself that she was watching the whole cooking process after all, so he couldn't have put poison in there. Holding her fist tightly, she realized that it was only her problem. Apparently, she was mentally obsessed with her fantasies. But still, Iju decided that everything depended on her determination. She gathered her strength and asked the guy to give that plate to her. He asked the girl again in slight shock. Had he heard it? The girl through gritted teeth repeated her words. Still, it was no big deal that Doguk had prepared this for her. Holding the plate in his hands, he asked a little hesitantly if it was okay. And she doesn't need to be forced. The girl said she really wanted it. And so, once again, the plate of risotto with a ballon cream was in front of the girl. She looked at it as if it were her greatest fear. The girl holding the spoon in her hands reassured herself, saying that everything would be fine. Everything would definitely be okay, for she had been reborn. This time it can't be bad like in her last life. Deciding that she didn't want to lose, Iju picked up her spoon of food and frowned very much. No matter how confident she was, still, she was scared. All this time Doguk was of course watching her. He couldn't leave her alone, for suddenly something would need help. Immediately after the girl swallowed the food, she arrived in rapture. Nothing really happened to her. Taking some more food in her spoon, she began to describe this dish. It was quite soft, fluffy, tasty, and at that moment Doguk began to call out to Iju. It took him 3 times to call her before the girl turned her head. As soon as she turned to Doguk, the boy asked if it was tasty. He looked at the girl in fascination and waited for any words of feedback on his dinner. The girl again looked at the plate in fascination and said that it was really delicious. The guy once again reconsidered and then exhaled with the words, "Fortunately, it's fine." Iju looked at him in bewilderment and wondered, why does he have such a strange expression on his face? He then raised his head again and watched the girl with kitten eyes. After a while, he called out to the girl who was eating. Iju again turned around in bewilderment and asked what was wrong. Still with the same warmth, he looked at the girl and then he proposed to live together. Such an offer from a guy she definitely didn't expect. Iju immediately began to think what he wanted to do. Doguk said that he wanted to live together with her, experiencing the life of a married couple. He would like to watch movies together, maybe play different games together. In general, he wanted to do different activities with the girl. Doguk smiled again and said that he would like to try everything with the girl, starting today. The girl couldn't believe her ears. She asked him again, trying to see if he was joking. Doguk said she didn't have to worry, because no one would come here. Moreover, his parents don't know about this place. But still the girl said that's not what she meant. She looked at him and asked him if he really meant that they would live together now. Doguk realized what she meant and was a little surprised. He exhaled and told the girl that as much as he didn't want to upset her, it was a bit of a stretch now. Doguk explained to Iju that he plans to live apart for a while. He wants to build up a reputation in the girl's eyes first. The girl seemed surprised, but was actually glad that Doguk would live separately. The guy laughed and asked what was wrong. Is Iju really sorry? The girl immediately said she wasn't. Then he decided to remind her of something else. It was about the password that only Iju and him know. The boy assured her that no one would come here in any way, so Iju could rest in peace. She looked at Doguk in bewilderment and wondered. It seemed to her as if he was avoiding her. The guy was just about to leave, but he remembered something else. He wants Iju to promise him one thing. The girl immediately asked him what it was. He asked the girl not to enter the room at the end of the corridor under any circumstances. The girl was a little surprised. The room at the end of the corridor. Doguk confirmed and once again said not to go in there. Of course the girl promised him, but she immediately wondered what was in that room. Doguk also added that he had prepared essentials and skincare products for her so that Iju could take care of herself and the house until his return. The girl was not very happy about the cleaning, but she said she understood. Then she remembered something and called Doguk, who was about to leave. The girl asked if she could invite Sujin here today. She immediately said that if Doguk didn't like it, she wouldn't do it. The guy looked into the girl's eyes and said that from now on this house belongs to Iju as well, which means she doesn't need to ask his permission. He told Iju that she could invite anyone she wanted to come here. The girl's eyes opened wide at Doguk's surprise and kindness. The girl somewhat skeptically said okay. At this moment Doguk once again remembered something. From his pocket he took out the house key and handed it to the girl. Iju laughed and asked if it was the same key, but changed from a suite key to a house key. Doguk smirked and said it was. On the very day of their acquaintance, Iju used the same key to get into the suite. Doguk looked into the girl's eyes and said that he wanted to put his entire future in Iju's hands. He asked if she had the same future. The girl looked at him as if mesmerized. Then she did smile at the boy and said that she had never had such a future before. After a while, her friend Sujin came to the girl's house. She was delighted. She asked in puzzlement if this was really the place where Doguk lived. Iju nodded but said he was not here today. Falling down on the sofa, she said with a note of sarcasm that it was too bad because she wanted to talk to him. Then in front of Iju brought them a snack. She put a tray of food on the table. Sujin looked dubiously at the tray and said that she did not like dry food. The girl suggested that she order fried chicken, to which Iju told her that she didn't eat. After opening the can, she asked her friend, is she still the same? She sighed heavily and said that she really needed to change. Sujin confirmed her words and said that she really needed to. Otherwise people would think she was selfish. Then the girl thought about it and remembered what happened a while ago with Doguk's food. Iju smiled and said that things are getting better with this topic now though. The girl took a sip and said that if she could still fix it, then she would gladly drink soju with Sujin at the diner. Sujin jumped up in horror. She asked the girl not to scare her like that because it gave her goosebumps. The girl kept doing examples, and Sujin asked her to stop. Laughing, Iju said no more. Anyway, Sujin decided it was time to get on with more important things. She opened her laptop and said that now they would start discussing absolutely everything about the Snyogin Group Corporation. The girl turned to her friend and said that it was all high-level information, so you should listen carefully and memorize. So, they will start from the most vulnerable point. Seo Young Giant. He's the chairman of the Snyogin Group Corporation, an easy target and a kind enough leader. His personal life is pretty decent. Since he has failed in love through work, he is very likely to settle for a love marriage. Therefore, he may be the easiest opponent to defeat. Iju was writing everything down diligently. The girl continued onward. Next was Doguk's grandfather. He had now left the chairman's chair and returned to his hometown to rest for a while. Sujin said that although he had retired, he was still the most influential person in Snyogin Corporation. Iju listened attentively. Her friend continued to talk about Njayu Seo. He built and developed the company from scratch, so he's not just Doguk's grandfather. That's why they should pay more attention to him. Next, she decided to talk about Doguk's half-brother, Jeongwook Seo. This guy is the CEO of Snyogin Group and is now the head of the corporation. As everyone says, he is kind and honest, which is why he is good at his assigned job. He also runs many charity projects. The girl said that he once hurt his leg like that, but it doesn't make him feel uncomfortable. Sujin said that they probably won't meet, so they can move on. Iju asked in bewilderment if that's it. Sujin asked again. Iju said that she is talking about Jeongwook now. The girl sighed and said that based on what she investigated about him, that's really all. Of course, the girl said that she had no more questions about him. However, she remembered Doguk's words about his brother. According to him, he is not sincere with anyone and is only real when he is alone with Doguk. Iju realized that the person Sujin described was completely different from what Doguk had said. She wanted to know what was wrong. Sujin suddenly said that there was one more important thing. Doguk doesn't like Jeongwook. Iju was surprised. So Jeongwook hates Doguk. Sujin immediately said that he doesn't. The girl wanted to ask a question again, but Sujin told her that they still had a long way to go. So, the next character. At this moment, a picture of an informal girl on the TV turned on. Sujin screamed in horror, not realizing what she was doing here. She was nervously clicking something on her laptop. Finally, the girl switched the picture and on it was Dona. This is the youngest daughter of the corporation. She is Doguk's only sister and has the highest level of difficulty. She doesn't have a high position, but she is a bit of an eccentric personality. Also, Sujin heard that the girl got married recently, and the one who smiles brightly and does almost nothing is Yeo-byeon. This is Dona and Doguk's personal secretary. He has a fairly low difficulty level. The guy manages Doguk's schedule and also steps in as an intermediary between him and his family. Iju at this point was thinking a bit and scratching her chin. Sujin asked what was wrong. The girl said she was just surprised that Dona would cut her hair like that for him. How much does she love him? Sujin laughed and said that she did it because of her parents' objections. She fell in love with Yeo-byeon at first sight, so she can do anything for him. The girl doesn't really know how to describe how these two felt the moment their life together was in danger. Iju smiled and said it was the true love of their century. The girl said it's about time to move on to the next one, and it's Aunt Sujin. Madam Yeonhwa Cha. The girl said that this person truly has a difficulty of 5 stars, so Iju is obliged to listen carefully. So, this is the owner of Segong Group Corporation. She's 55 years old. After the divorce, the woman didn't think about marriage anymore, but her uncle pursued Sujin's aunt to the end and for 2 years. As a result, they got married. Iju asked her friend about her personality type. Sujin said without hesitation that she is fierce. The girl remembers her every time she gets scared. She has never seen anyone more fierce than her. When Doguk started his own company, Jeongwook suddenly became the heir to the corporation. Sujin said the woman doesn't like it. Iju thought about it and asked, so she wants Doguk to come back. Once again, the girl thought about it. She needed to bring Doguk back to the Segong Group Corporation. If you think about it like that, it really wouldn't be easy. Immediately Sujin cheered her up and told her that it didn't mean that there was no way to do it. The girl said that although her aunt looks very strict, she actually has a lot of feelings inside. Iju was puzzled, for Sujin herself had only talked about being fierce. The girl said that was correct, and then handed her an envelope. Sujin told Iju that she could try to introduce Yeonhwa to her. At that moment, the girl was opening the envelope. When she opened it, she was very surprised because it was a flyer from Jamie's cooking class. Sujin said that this cooking class is like a gathering of noble ladies. It is led by a girl named Jamie. And as far as Sujin has heard, she only accepts people into the class through people close to her. Nevertheless, Sujin looked into Iju's eyes and said that her relationship with people is very extensive. She also heard that Jamie can find high-level matchmaking sessions and information. After thinking a little, Iju remembered that her stepmother also wanted to attend this class. Finishing discussing Yeonhwa, the girl said that she hates fakes the most. She has a very deep look in her eyes. While writing this down, Iju summarized that Doguk looks a lot like her mom. At this point, Sujin said that leaves the last one whose level is the highest. Iju looked at her in bewilderment and asked who she was talking about since there was no one else. And why was it the hardest? A picture of Doguk appeared on the TV screen and the girl cried out in bewilderment. Sujin sighed and said that he is the biggest problem in their marriage. She heard that he has been a genius since childhood. Always number one. He's smart and very intelligent. The guy has superior looks because he inherited all the dominant genes. He is now the director of JC Sport. Sujin, remembering his character, decided that he is so out to cause trouble, but it's all an accident. Iju asked what kind of accident it was. Sighing heavily, she said she didn't know much about it, except that he almost died, but her aunt didn't talk much about it. He originally had a wonderful character, but after that incident everything changed. The girl asked in bewilderment how he had changed after the accident and what he was like before. With a little bit of hatred, Sujin said that he was very, very happy and he was hyperactive and also naughty. She recalled the time when he bullied her. Unfortunately, it was after that incident that Doguk became more withdrawn. He began to talk very little. Thinking to herself, the girl summarized that he had changed after the near-fatal accident. Iju asked her friend what the accident was. The girl looked at her and said she could ask Doguk about it herself. She sighed and said that she didn't know and that he simply wouldn't tell her. The girl asked why Sujin thought so. Surprised, Sujin said it's because Iju and Doguk are getting married. That's normal, isn't it? Iju suddenly thought about it. She started imagining walking with him and talking about anything. Smiling, she decided that she should definitely try talking to him. It was actively getting dark outside at this time, so it was already time for Sujin to go home. 13:30. As soon as she left, Iju decided that she needed to take a bath, so she did so. While taking a shower, Iju was looking around. The bathroom was also in pink colors. The girl suddenly thought of Doguk, who was telling her why he had decided to make everything pink. Thinking back to him, a smile appeared on the girl's face. Looking at the rose petals, the color pink seemed more and more good to her. As suddenly the girl arrived in shock and only opened her eyes wide. At this point she decided that it was time to get out of the bathroom, because something was happening to her thoughts. Looking at herself in the mirror, Iju reminded herself again that this was just a marriage of convenience. After a while, The girl stood in front of her so-called favorite house, inspecting it. Iju realized that it didn't evoke any good memories. Finally, she opened the door and went inside. At this time, the hall was too quiet and empty. And after all, she had only been away from home for a few days. Of course, Iju only came here to get all her things from the room. After a while, the girl was actively doing just that. After another small amount of time, she would finish collecting them and close the bags. Then she silently looked up and silently looked around her room as if for the last time. Looking at her formerly favorite room, the girl knew that this place was going to turn into a warehouse. Already standing with her suitcase on the way out, the girl suddenly thought, what would have happened if she had dropped everything and left much earlier? Iju started to descend the steps as she suddenly heard the door open sharply, followed by laughter. It was the girl's parents. The stepmother immediately asked if she was going to leave so soon. Then she smiled and said that they would definitely meet before the wedding. The father only looked glumly into his daughter's eyes. Then the stepmother began to smile and told the girl that she was not sure about one thing, whether everything would go according to her plan. Iju smiled back and told them to stay home. Dad looked at her in bewilderment and asked her what her words meant. Approaching the woman point blank, Iju stated that she was going to return to the company. At that moment, she smiled wryly and asked them to treat her paintings with care, and also have them say hello to Yura instead. Of course, without waiting for any words, the girl bypassed them and went to the door, asking them to guard her room carefully. Looking after the departing girl, the stepmother still decided to tell her what she thought. She asked Iju to stop, but she did not listen to her. The girl turned around and stared silently into her stepmother's eyes, and the girl still also silently slammed the door, still not hearing the stepmother's screams. Lately, Iju had begun to stress out the stepmother very much. She could not find words to describe her anger. At that time, Doguk was sitting in his office doing important business. We're reading another document. The guy squeezed his eyebrows because he was tired from the working day. Suddenly, someone knocked in the room, and reflexively the guy said to come in. A worried Sayok stood at the entrance and looked directly at the director. A surprised Doguk asked him what was wrong. The guy walked over a little embarrassed and said that he had something to show Doguk. After that, he held out a folder. The principal snatched it out of Sayok's hands and began to read it carefully. With a clatter, Doguk put the folder on the table and raised his head and asked if this would be successful, because it was so trivial. Still also a little embarrassed, the guy said, I think it's possible. Doguk told him that he wasn't very sure what he was saying. He just can't trust his look. The guy asked what the director meant. He smiled and said that Sayok has low standards and insecurity, and he is also bad even in choosing women. The guy with a note of sarcasm smiled and said that if Doguk is giving him advice about women, he wants to know if he can only say one thing. Surely Doguk appreciated the guy's attitude and told him to show all of himself. Folding his hands behind his back and looking confidently into the principal's eyes, Sayok said that Iju doesn't like him. The boy smiled and asked, does he really know Ijuhan that well? He averted his gaze and said, good enough. After all, they've been together with her for 5 years. Looking at the principal again, the guy said that she was only using him for her own benefit. No more than that. Standing up from the table, Doguk whispered one phrase to himself. Apparently that's why they kicked Iju out in the winter in the middle of the night. Sayok didn't hear the phrase and asked again in bewilderment. The guy said it didn't matter and then added that Iju could use it however he wanted. He explained that he was in love with her and that it annoyed him when other men said that beautiful name. He approached Sayok and asked again, can it be love? He just can't give Iju to a man who let her wander the streets barefoot in winter. Doguk looked angrily into the eyes of Iju's ex-husband and told him to leave. The boy asked in bewilderment what the principal meant. Without answering Sayok's question, Doguk turned around and said that if there was no more information, he should leave. Realizing that the director would not make contact, the guy told him he would. Once again, Doguk sat down at his desk and realized that there was a lot of work to be done. At that moment, there was some talking coming from the corridor, and then someone jokingly said, kill him. The boy raised his head in bewilderment. After a while, Seon-gun stood in the passage. He asked Doguk why he was so angry. The guy started yawning and telling Doguk that even if Sayok is a former Iju, he shouldn't have done that. Doguk started reprimanding his childhood friend because he told him more than once not to sleep in the office. The boy asked why he hates the department head so much. He just has a good capacity for work, doesn't he? Doguk sighed and said that this is the main problem. He just can't fire the man. Taking something out of the refrigerator, Seon-gun was surprised. Even though Sayok is a former Iju, is Doguk really going to keep him working here? The guy looked irritably at his drinking friend and thought about the fact that he looked like a ghost. Why does he know everything? At this point, the guy decided to put a jar somewhere, and the best place in his opinion was the folder with the report. Noticing this, Doguk immediately inhaled heavily and began to knead his hands. Suddenly, the guy started to take off his watch. Seong Gwon, realizing what had happened, was horrified and began to ask why Doguk was taking off his watch. He immediately removed the drink can and started saying that he would definitely clean it up. Looking into his friend's eyes, he reminded him that he was already the principal. How can you be so cruel still? At that moment, Doguk's hand flew towards Seong Gwon. The guy closed his eyes since he didn't want to see all of Doguk's anger. But that's not the case. Doguk only held out his hand, pointed at his wrist, and asked if Seong Gwon could see anything here. The guy, completely puzzled, immediately said there was nothing there. What should there be? When Doguk took his hand away, he was surprised. Can't he see anything? The guy immediately remembered a moment from that day. On the girl's hand he saw a number. Then he remembered a situation when they were sitting in a cafe, and the girl asked him if he had seen her wrist. At that point, the guy was surprised and said he didn't see anything. Doguk was pulled out of his thoughts by a bewildered Seong Gwon who wanted to know what happened, but the guy said everything was fine. He looked at his hand. It had the exact same writing on it as Iju's hand. And so, the action moves to that most horrible and life-changing day in the girl's life. The moment when she ran out onto the road without noticing the car that was rushing at her at full speed. At that moment, Doguk was driving that car. His condition was not good. Suddenly, the guy realized what had happened, and raising his head, he was completely terrified. Right in front of his car lay a girl who was unconscious. It was at this point that he started to look around and saw Seok, who was hugging Yura. He suddenly realized that he knew this person. And all in all, as it turned out, their fates had intertwined at that very crossroads. Suddenly, the boy saw a light approaching in his direction. He turned his head in bewilderment and froze. At the same time, there was another accident. At full speed, another car drove into Doguk's car. Coming out of his memories, the guy kept looking at his hand. He was already dead at that time. Then it turns out that this is the deadline. The action moves to Iju's apartment. Meanwhile, it's already dark outside. The girl sat in her room at her desk and wrote carefully. In front of her was her diary, which she kept. In it she wrote down important dates. She was left with only the people Jeonghai had brought into the company. Closing the book, the girl thought about the fact that in order to return to the company, she would need to create her own faction. Staring as if into the void, Iju wondered about the faction. Had there ever been anything like that in her life before? The girl then shifted her gaze to her watch. After that, she sank into her memories. Once again, it was the same house she had lived in all her childhood. It was night, and the girl was sitting on her bed and shivering terribly. At that moment, the door to her room opened and Iju was very frightened. It was her stepmother who came into her room with an hourglass. She turned them over and addressed the girl. Immediately, she began to reprimand her, telling her that she was an unlucky child from the day she was born. Iju covered her ears, for she did not want to hear this nightmare. The woman kept talking, asking the girl if she was still a happy child, why she was constantly being adopted and then sent back. The girl clutched her ears tightly and repeated to herself that she couldn't hear anything. The stepmother never stopped telling the girl that there was no one in this world who loved Iju. She asked her not to be offended, for the truth is not offended. The woman suddenly began to scream. She was repeating to Iju that the foulest misfortune is her. No one loves unhappy children like her. Iju, no matter how hard she tried to cover her ears, heard it all. The woman told her that she would never be happy, at which point tears came out of the girl's eyes. The stepmother asked if Iju had heard everything she had said. Just in case, she decided to go over and say it again. Looking into Iju's eyes, the woman said that the girl should not have been born. If you don't want to miss my new videos, support the channel by subscribing and don't forget to like the video.